The man on the phone screen says, "Family." Sounds are heard from the phone. "Just look at this handsome guy. He is about to engage in a life or death battle." A guy wearing an orange shirt and long brown hair is walking along a crowded street. He smiles and looks at the phone. The guy thinks that his video has really become so popular, now they will definitely offer him advertising. Still smiling, he crosses the road at a pedestrian crossing, but does not see a huge car rushing towards him at high speed. The guy is standing in a completely white room, in which even the furniture is white. A girl sits at a desk and looks at the guy in surprise. The guy, with an equally surprised look, asks her if he died. A girl wearing a t-shirt with the inscription "Go to hell." She thinks, why did this guy die when she is already finishing work? The girl tells the guy that since his video has amused many people, his merits have exceeded the norm and he has a chance to be reborn in another world. The guy hit the table with a joyful cry and said that he could really choose which world he would be reborn into. The girl stopped his joy and said that no, he needs to press the button on the randomizer. The guy extended his finger to the button and pressed. The randomizer wheel spun and the inscription popped up on it: "The strongest master in the world of martial arts, the demon lord Li Tzu-wai." The guy clenched his fists enthusiastically and exclaimed, "Isn't he too lucky?" The girl, with an indifferent look, extended her finger towards the white door and said that if the guy had already received the answer, then let him go through that door. The guy slammed the door loudly and shouted, "The martial arts master has arrived." The girl, standing up and putting her bag on her shoulder, looked in his direction with confusion. With a movement of her hand, she pulled out a piece of paper with an inscription from the randomizer and said that we finally need to fix this machine, since the long text is not completely displayed. On the piece of paper was written, "An employee of the AYN, who was accidentally killed by the strongest martial artist, the demon lord Li Tzu-wai." There was a guy lying at the foot of the cliff. Lightning was flashing in the sky and heavy rain was pouring. The guy, still lying on the ground, wondered where he was. Suddenly he jumped up and remembered that he had been reborn. Now the guy's name is Awai, and his status says that he is the strongest martial artist who can easily deal with the in-workers who get in his way. Awai thought with a malicious smile that he had been reborn into the greatest martial artist, Demon Lord Li Tzu-wai. Here he regretfully touched a piece of fabric hanging from his clothes and thought that the person he had been reborn into looked more like a ragamuffin. And he noticed the demonic sect tablet lying at his feet. But his gaze fell on three men running towards him. They stopped and one of them said that this was all strange. The aura of the demon lord Li Tzu-wai could be felt somewhere nearby, so why were there no traces? Suddenly Awai, holding a sign in his hands, asked them if they were looking for him. The three men looked at him with confusion and exclaimed that if this was the tablet of the demonic sect, then it was him. They shouted that this was incredible, since Li Tzu-wai had already changed his appearance. Li Tzu-wai stood surrounded by flames. Indeed, this is an incomparable bloodthirsty aura. Cruel and merciless, how many people did Li Tzu-wai kill for this technique? There was a whole mountain of corpses lying, and all the bodies were pierced with swords. They heard about it. One of the men said that Li Tzu-wai was poisoned by the venom of the centipede. His strength is no longer what it was before. Awai thought it was surprising that he was poisoned. No wonder he had to pretend to be human. 3 fiery blades rose into the sky. 3 men stood with their fiery blades pointed in his direction and shouted that today they would take his head. Awai just grinned and thought, are they serious when they say this? All 3 men showed surprise on their faces. Suddenly Awai laughed wildly. He yelled that why did they even think that if there were 3 of them, they could defeat him. Although Awai was poisoned, he is still the strongest master in this world. Lightning burst over the heads of the 3 men. The most important of them got too angry and said that in such a situation, he could only use one technique, creating a golden holy sword. The 3 men raised their sword blades to the sky and a golden whirlwind began to form around the blades. Suddenly the whirlwind turned into one very tall golden pillar. Awai said that they really think such a pathetic trick will work on him. Suddenly lightning saw gold. Author's note, gold conducts electricity well. Lightning touched the golden pillar. Awai pointed his finger at the 3 men and said that although he still doesn't know how to use this technique, but now he is that handsome guy. And with his words, lightning flowed into the golden pillar and struck the 3 men with a powerful discharge of current. Only skeletons remained of their bodies. Awai put his hand to his forehead and thought that he just needed to rely on the muscle memory of this body. A tall column of lightning erupted right in front of his eyes. Awai looked at him in bewilderment and said, 3 men were destroyed in an instant. On the ground lay the skeletons of 3 men killed by lightning. Awai exclaimed, here it is, the greatest power of the master of this world. Awai looked at his hand in surprise and thought that this was too incredible. Kanu City. Awai thought it was too noisy. He said in surprise, "Is this really the world of martial arts?" Suddenly the little girl who was holding her mother's hand exclaimed, "Mommy, look, isn't this the demon lord, Li Tsu Wai?" Awai stopped in fear. His gaze hardened. The woman looked at him in surprise. A crowd of people gathered near him. Surprised and angry exclamations were heard all around. Awai thought that he must have been exposed, but how is this possible? Hasn't he changed his appearance? What should he do? He needs to control himself. There are a lot of people here. Suddenly, on the bulletin board, Awai saw that he was wanted. The advertisement said that the demon lord Li Tsu Wai was wanted. This person is very dangerous, and if you have any information about this person, please report to the Iron Shirt sect. Awai recoiled from the bulletin board in surprise. People pointed their fingers at him. Exhaling in a relaxed manner, he thought that he looked different now. Suddenly a little boy in blue headphones asked him if he was Awai and what he was doing here. Awai looked sideways at him in surprise. Meanwhile, the boy led him into a building with a sign that said, "Every client is our guest." Awai looked around in surprise, and the boy said all this time that he did not expect that Awai would be so unlucky. He not only fell from a cliff, but also lost his memory. Awai for 2 days, and everyone decided that he had returned to your hometown. The boy reached the room and, extending his hand towards the entrance, said that this is Awai's room. Let him change into clean clothes, and the manager is losing patience. Awai walked over to the stack of books and picked up 3 of them. Their titles are Bone Changing Wheat, Sword Art from Beginner to Master at the Center for the Basics of Martial Arts. Awai looked at the books in surprise and said, "Is this my room?" He scratched his nose with a happy face and thought that this seemed to be his fake identity. 36 Technique, Deceive by pretending to be weak. Perfect. Squeezing the demonic sect sign with his hand, he thought that he needed to quickly get used to this role. Awai's hand grabbed the chicken's wings, and her other hand held a knife. He suddenly thought, what's going on? Suddenly a huge and muscular man tells him that Awai really hurt his head so much that he couldn't even kill a chicken. Awai thought with a smile on his face, killing the chicken, is it clear that this is to hide his bloodthirsty aura? Suddenly a man's scream interrupted his thoughts. He shouted, why is Awai delaying? He will tell the boss to reduce Awai's monthly fee for this month. Awai still smiled, and the man continued to shout, what bad luck, he missed the morning work, and Awai also cannot fulfill his duties. What else can he do, besides beheading chickens? He is not even able to pluck correctly. Awai constantly runs around with his useless techniques. Is that all his skills? What's the point of learning this? Even a pig can do simple martial arts. The man saw that Awai was not listening to him and shouted again, are you completely deaf? I am speaking with you. Suddenly, the angry Awai slashed at the chicken's head with a knife and the man walked away from him in fear. Awai raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. He said, what's the matter? Does the man want to say something else? A few hours ago, a pile of corpses of warriors lay on the ground. A dark silhouette towered over her. He laughed and shouted in an angry voice, a bunch of insects. The surviving warriors said that reinforcements would be coming soon. Today they must stop the demon lord Awai. The warriors stood up from the ground with an effort of will. Awai extended his hand, in which the demonic sect tablet was floating, and grinned. The surviving warriors looked at this in horror and shouted that he was going to give an order to his subordinates. They needed to stop him. One of the warriors imperiously extended his hand and said, forward. Suddenly, a huge flurry of fire rose into the sky and Awai, with a bloodthirsty look, asked the soldiers if they would really stop him. Seriously, far away in the mountains, Awai sat near the grave of a chicken. Sitting on his knees, he said, poor chicken, the visitor even gnawed its bones. And with these words, he touched the gravestone of the grave where the remains of the chicken were buried. Awai said that let her promise that in her next life she will not become a chicken. Standing at the grave, he said that he had already been in the fresh air, and that was enough. It was time for him to return to work. Suddenly, a bright red fire sphere that was flying along a given route crashed into Awai. At first he was perplexed and screamed in fear, but then he realized that he was flying off a cliff. He screamed in fear and thought that the wind was too strong today. Just like that, the real owner of the body disappeared. He sacrificed his life to block the path of the demon sect's message. Awai looked at the man, grinning evilly. The man said, stuttering, you, and thought what happened to Awai, but just recently he looked like a scared kitten. Breaking away from his thoughts, the man put a knife to Awai's throat and shouted, I've been working here for several years now, and that means you're snapping back. Do you even know who I am? The man angrily waved his hand and shouted again that he would use Awai for meat instead of that chicken. While the man was angry, Awai was lost in thought. He thought that this cook was in good shape, although he looked like a complete fool, although he could hardly be called a fighter. The man noticed that Awai was not listening to him and, taking the huge fish in his hands, hit Awai in the face with it. The man shouted, "What kind of look is this?" The blow from the fish turned out to be strong, as Awai flew back. Suddenly Awai took a knife and pointed it towards the cook with the thought that he wanted to check for himself how strong this cook was. The man got scared and asked in a trembling voice, "What is he doing?" Awai stood at this time with a terrifying grin on his face. Suddenly the man slipped and fell to the floor, and then a knife stuck into the wall next to him. The man screamed in fright. With evil eyes, Awai leaned over him and said, "You know what my favorite dish is. First you cut the meat into thin slices, then wrap them in a thin layer of starch, add spices, marinate them, and finally fry them over low heat." A well-groomed man sprinkled spices on pieces of meat and presented the dish on a white plate. Awai said, "This exquisite dish is ready," and put the blade to the man's face, which made him even more frightened, and said that pork is usually used for this dish. Has he tried this? The man's tears flowed from fear and he screamed even louder. Awai smiled smugly and said that the man was yelling too loudly. He thought that he had not done anything yet, but the man was already crying, and it would probably be a shame for their great demonic sect if he killed such a pitiful man. Awai said that it was more boring than he thought. At this time, the man was lying on the floor and through tears said that he only had muscles and the meat would be very tough, and in general, he was tasteless. Suddenly Awai heard some sounds behind him. He looked around and saw 3 workers who stood frozen in place and looked at what was happening. Awai asked them why they froze. Was there something wrong with them? They said that everything was fine with them, and they'd better go wipe the table and wash the floor. Awai exhaled and thought, why is everyone here so ugly and submissive? Although okay, submissive ones will do for him too. Suddenly someone grabbed him by the clothes. Awai looked down in confusion and saw a boy. The boy, still holding him by the clothes, looked at him. Room for brushwood. Inside there were piles of brushwood and bundles of fabric. Awai fell contentedly onto the bed and said that he had finally moved all his things here. He yawned with pleasure, and it was clear from his face that he was very tired. Awai thought that he would have to study all sorts of cultivation techniques and understand how things were going with the demonic sect, and it would be hard. But who said that the life of the strongest master in the world could be simple? Besides, today he met one promising boy. It's not because he somehow likes him. Awai thinks that one should start practicing martial arts from childhood. If you start in childhood, then in the future he will always be confident in his abilities. And with these words, Awai burst into a smile. Suddenly, Awai's stomach began to growl. He thought that he should quickly have dinner and go talk to that boy. He left the room and stretched. Suddenly a blow was heard from inside the room. The boy flew against the wall. He was hit by Kyan Woojin. He stood in front of the fallen boy and said if he had lost his memory, and it seemed to him that the boy was blatantly lying to him. Kyan Woojin kicked the wall, scaring the boy. Kyan Woojin said that he knows Awai well, and they are suitable for each other, an orphan and a loser. Kyan Woojin bent over the boy and slowly said why the boy and Awai climbed on the man. Don't they know that the man is a friend of their Master Zhao, and Kyan Woojin will be happy to see how Master Zhao will beat them when he returns. Here Kyan Woojin squinted his eyes slyly and said that why don't he himself take revenge for their master's friend, and then, when he returns, he will tell him everything and accept his well-deserved reward for a good deed. Kyan Woojin laughed an evil laugh and said that he was a genius. Kyan Woojin pointed his finger at the boy and told him that if he did not want to be beaten to death, then let him bring him Awai. Suddenly the door opened and Kyan Woojin looked with a surprised look at who entered the room. Kyan Woojin saw who it was and his eyes narrowed in surprise. With a loaf of bread in his teeth, Awai flew into the room and told Kyan Woojin to shut his mouth. He had already heard enough, and, having bitten off a piece of bread, Awai told the boy to forgive him for being late. The boy looked at him with a hint of surprise. Awai, chewing bread, shouted that the main character always appears at the last moment, and Awai pointed his finger at Kyan Woojin. Kyan Woojin stepped back, but immediately said with a smile that the hero of the occasion had finally arrived. He thought to himself that this was just the perfect chance. He would beat Awai and please Master Zhao. He looked at Awai with a smile. But Awai thought this was a great chance to teach Kyan Woojin a lesson and show the boy his strength. He pursed his lips and thought that the boy would literally start idolizing me when he dealt with Kyan Woojin. Awai imagines the boy saying that Awai is his role model. Awai thought that he would not miss this great chance. Awai and Kyan Woojin prepared to fight. Suddenly, Kyan Woojin clearly raised his hand to his head and told Awai that he was not taught to respect his elders, and if he immediately kneels down and begins to beg for forgiveness, then he might think about forgiving him. But Awai, without listening to him, told the boy to step aside and wait for him. The boy agreed. Kyan Woojin literally exploded with rage and shouted that his instinct of self-preservation had really been taken away along with his memory, and how dare he ignore it. Awai, with a wide smile on his face, told him not to act as if Kyan Woojin was better than him. Kyan Woojin raised his fist to strike and prepared to hit Awai, saying that a loser will always remain a loser. But suddenly Awai tripped Kyan Woojin and grabbed his hand and threw him to the floor. Kyan Woojin was confused by what happened. Kyan Woojin's face fell in surprise. Awai slowly stood up and said that his technique really works and the hours spent watching self-defense videos were not in vain. He had long wanted to test this technique in action, and although he would not yet be able to use all sorts of cool techniques of this body, but with his current internal spiritual energy, even ordinary kicks and throws become deadly. While Kyan Woojin lay on the floor, Awai admired his work. But from the words that Awai said, Kyan Woojin heard that Awai said that he could not use the full capabilities of this body yet. And that was bad. If Awai left him alive, then his identity might be revealed and he will kill him with an ordinary kick. That's annoying. Kyan Woojin opened his mouth in surprise and thought, this body identity can be revealed. And then it dawned on him that he had already read about something similar in one book, and Awai was not what he seemed. Awai noticed that Kyan Woojin was looking at him strangely, and thought that apparently Kyan Woojin managed to remain conscious after his incredible throw. At this time, Kyan Woojin thought that Awai's movements were something he had never seen before. Kyan Woojin could not stand it and shouted, "Who is Awai?" Awai looked at him displeasantly and powerfully hit him in the chest with his palm, after which he asked what he just said and what he should answer about how Kyan Woojin recognized him. Kyan Woojin was literally suffocating as Awai squeezed his throat. Awai thought that although this guy was a complete weakling, he was able to feel his true strength, and in addition to this, he was able to survive his throw, enhanced by incredible spiritual energy. Awai released Kyan Woojin's throat. Kyan Woojin began to cough horribly and thought that Awai was a real madman. But then Awai said that since he found out about everything, then Awai has no choice. And with these words, he raises his hand to strike and swings his palm into Kyan Woojin's spine. The spine cracks and Kyan Woojin falls to the floor, unable to rise. It seems that Kyan Woojin has begun to see his late grandmother. Awai asked him if he wanted to know what had just happened. And without waiting for an answer, he said that the technique with which he used it is called the crushing bone palm, and the essence of this technique is that after 7 days nothing will remain of his opponent's bones. Awai looked at the lying Kyan Woojin with a proud look. Kyan Woojin looked at Awai with horror and incomprehension and thought that his bones would really turn to dust. Awai said to him with his hand outstretched, "Is he willing to die such a miserable death?" Kyan Woojin did not answer, and Awai continued to say that a great man once said, "True enlightenment is the victory over death and the creation of a new future." With a serious face, Awai told Kyan Woojin that he would give him a choice. Deftly jumping from branch to branch, Ziyu said that it was somehow boring here and her father always gave her boring work. Ziyu said with a dissatisfied expression that her father said that it had been uneasy here lately, and told her to stay at home. But, apparently, she knows that the remnants of the followers of the demonic sect are hiding in this vicinity. And does her father really think that she will get in the way? Ziyu said with a sly look that she will see if she can catch all the remaining followers of the demonic sect and bring them to their father, after which he will definitely stop underestimating me. Ziyu was holding in her hands a portrait of an escaped follower, which was stolen with great difficulty. Ziyu unfolded the scroll and said that now she will see who scared her father so much that he decided to leave her at home. On the scroll was a portrait of a girl with white hair, and it was written, "A list of followers of a demonic sect." Ziyu looked at the girl's portrait in bewilderment, and the next moment she angrily tore the portrait, and shouted that why this girl's portrait was so different from ordinary portraits of criminals. She smiled evilly and said that she would not be surprised if all their guards were exterminated by such remnants of followers. They will obviously fall for her. Ziyu clutched the torn portrait. Suddenly she heard some noise behind her. She turned her head and saw Awai and a boy standing in the middle of a forest clearing. The boy told Awai that it was true that if he studied martial arts, he would stop being bullied. Awai smugly replied that yes, and he himself saw how easily he got off with Kyan Woojin, who pestered him. Awai will even say more, if a boy learns martial arts, the whole world will begin to admire him. But Awai thought to himself that at least it was possible that they would start hunting for him. The boy said that his sister said that if he gets a master, he will always have to bow to him. And with these words the boy fell to his knees in front of Awai. Awai just laughed at this. The boy, without paying attention to this, said that he really wants to become stronger, and he asks Awai to train him. The red-haired woman says, "Young master, you are back." The girls standing behind her also greet Kyan Woojin. The woman, holding a letter in her hands, tells Kyan Woojin that he came just in time. He received a letter from the capital. Kyan Woojin said displeasedly that why did he need to know what was going on in the capital? He did not have time for the chatter of those old people. The woman looked at him with a smile and replied that then he should allow his maid to change clothes and apply a medicinal compress to his back. She took off his clothes and was horrified to see that there was a mark on the clothes from a wise blow. The woman recoiled in horror and shouted, "What is this?" The woman said with tears in her eyes, "Who did this to him? After all, there was even an imprint of the blow, and even mosquitoes did not dare to bite their young master, but there was a whole blow." Kyan Woojin remained silent and said that there was no need to apply the medicine. The woman became thoughtful. Kyan Woojin only frowned darkly. He remembered the moment when a Y hit him in the back. The thing is that for many years Kyan Woojin was tormented by piercing pain in her back, and even the capital's doctors only shrugged. The pain receded only thanks to compresses, and a Y relieved him of his illness in just a couple of movements. In fact, no one dared to treat him harshly. Kyan Woojin thought that a Y probably did this on purpose, and either he would join him or die in 7 days. Kyan Woojin took his clothes and said that he needed to talk to a Y. The woman looked at him with confusion. The moon rose over the mountains. She smoothly illuminated everything around. The Y showed the boy martial arts moves. He told the boy that concentration and only concentration is important here. He repeated the movements menacingly and looked at the boy. A Y said that martial arts teach not only how to fight, but also the importance of unifying the inner spirit with the outer body. A Y wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead and said that he and the boy did a great job. He told the boy to train himself, and he would think about what exercises would suit him. While the boy was training, a Y was lost in thoughts that he still did not understand how to start learning martial techniques. He picked a blade of grass and, putting it in his mouth, continued to think that the man called the equipment that he had trash lying around. And this does not sound so tempting. He remembered 3 warriors who were destroyed by lightning. They said he was from a demonic sect. A Y thought tiredly that why do all the villains always want the whole world to know that they are the villains? Isn't it possible to pretend to be the good guys and carry out their dark deeds behind the scenes? If they did everything like this, then a Y wouldn't have to suffer now. Okay, for now it's better to focus on beginner techniques so that his young disciple will also understand everything. A Y looked with pleasure at the boy who was training hard. Suddenly a Y called the boy by the name of Xiao Shuai and told him to come over so that a Y could teach him the basics of fist fighting techniques. The boy asked in surprise whether he would really teach him the basics and asked why a Y called him Xiao Shuai. To this, a Y replied that the boy should remember the first rule, never introduce himself to strangers by his name, for now he is too young to understand this. A Y coughed embarrassedly, because he had never been able to remember names. Xie Yuyu, sitting on a tree branch, said boredly that she thought that these were some suspicious characters, but it turned out that they were a couple of weak-minded people. Why are they training horse gait in the middle of the night? Still with the same expression, Xie Yuyu thought that she doubted that a Y was a martial artist, but it didn't matter, she would just watch over them so that they would not be eaten by the timber wolves. A Y held the scroll in his hands and thought that he didn't even know what stage the owner of the body had reached, and how could he continue cultivating? Then the boy called a Y and said that he had finished studying martial techniques for beginners. A Y was very surprised to hear this and asked if he had really studied everything. The boy confirmed his words and, with eyes glowing with joy, asked a Y if he could try to use them. A Y allowed. The boy got into a fighting position and made the first blow. Suddenly, a golden beam flew out of his fist, destroying everything in its path as it advanced. The beam crashed into trees and animals, but then he headed towards a Y's house and instantly destroyed it. The boy and a Y looked in surprise and horror at what the boy had done. Burnt stumps stood around them. A Y thought with horror that the equipment for beginners that he had lying around could really be so powerful. He couldn't believe it. Then a Y pulled himself together and told the boy that he was a great fellow and stroked him on the head. The boy said that a Y's techniques are simply something. The boy thought that this technique was worth learning, and it was really cool. A Y instructed the boy to continue in the same spirit, and although he will not become stronger than him, if the boy tries, he may well become the second strongest in the world. The boy agreed and said that he would study hard and that he would not let a Y down. Xie Yu watched this in surprise and could not say anything. Suddenly she saw a tree burned by the boy's technology and thought with horror that who are they anyway? The boy and Awai approached the hut. Ziyuyu, watching them, thought that her father was right and it was difficult to distinguish great masters from ordinary people, and how could she be so blind when she saw only a couple of weak-minded people in them? Meanwhile, the boy begged Awai to move in with him. Ziyuyu thought that this boy's blow was so strong that it cut down several trees and almost destroyed the hut, which means Awai must be even more powerful. Awai said that of course they could, but this hut would be too small for them. And with these words, Awai poked at the wall of the hut, and after a strong blow from the boy, it simply fell apart from the touch. Ziyuyu thought in surprise that she couldn't believe that Awai destroyed his own house just because it was too small. Suddenly, next to her, she saw an equally surprised Kaiyan Wujin and, screaming in surprise, thought, "Where did he come from here?" Meanwhile, Awai said that he would need to learn to control his strength. The boy said with admiration that Awai's blow was simply amazing. Thinking for a moment, Awai said that this is, of course, true, but today it seems they will have to sleep on the street. Suddenly Awai hears screams and reacts with hostility to them and sees Kaiyan Wujin hugging his leg. He sees Kaiyan Wujin screaming his name and trying to hug him. Kaiyan Wujin, meanwhile, thinks that Awai is an incredibly skilled master, and it doesn't matter who he really is. The only important thing is that he is very strong. Awai destroyed the hut with just one touch. What stage is he even at? And with an admiring smile, he looked at the remains of the Awai hut. Kaiyan Wujin continued to think that maybe Awai is at the king stage, or maybe already at the saint stage. If he tags along with him, he will definitely end up on the killer list. Kaiyan Wujin tries to suck up to Awai by saying that he was blind before, and didn't Awai himself say that he only has two choices? Awai indignantly tried to push him away and shouted that he would never take such a student, and also of that age, and tells him to leave him alone. But Kaiyan Wujin, not paying attention to his words, shouted that he chose to follow Awai, and he promises that he will be useful. Awai indifferently said that what was the use of Kaiyan Wujin, but Kaiyan Wujin interrupted him and began to jabber that he had a lot of money, and could help with the repair of Awai's hut. But Awai stopped Kaiyan Wujin's words and replied that there are hundreds of ways to appease a person, but you can't take him with money. Awai thought to himself that how much money an ordinary servant in an inn might have. If he had not withstood my throw, he would have thought. In the next morning, Awai stands with his mouth wide open and looks at the luxurious house with a golden roof. Kaiyan Wujin proudly points to the house and says that there is a limit to the amount of money that can be withdrawn from a bank account, so he had to make do with only a modest house. Awai's eyes swam from the luxury of this house. The words began to sound in his head: limit, money, modest, house. Then he looked up from the spectacle and asked Kaiyan Wujin that he had a whole mountain of money. Why did he get a job in a tavern? Kaiyan Wujin answered with a satisfied look that because the strength of a martial artist in the real world comes first, and they say that Yuhang Town is ruled by forces from the shadows, and Boss Zhao is on the list of killers. That's why Kaiyan Wujin got a job as a servant to the inn of Boss Zhao, who rules the city of shadows, and what's the point of money if he doesn't have power? Awai choked in surprise and said that money also has power, so why didn't Kaiyan Wujin just throw some money to him? Kaiyan Wujin asked with a blank expression, does money really have power? The young girl was sitting on a chair with a wad of money in her hands. Opposite the table stood a man who looked enthusiastically at a wad of money. The man told the girl that she was so kind and they would give her all the documents tomorrow. The man's thoughts were that he couldn't believe that someone agreed to pay 10 times the cost of this pitiful hotel. This is a lot of money, and besides, he was never the owner of this hotel. The woman told Kaiyan Wujin that everything was ready. Kaiyan Wujin came out from behind the curtain and, waving his fan, said that Awai was right, money really has great power. Suddenly, he was surprised to notice that Ziyuyu was running into Awai's room. Awai sat at a wooden table and thought about what it means that this city of Yuhang is located in the country of Yuhangshui, and next to it is the state of Gusu, and then the central plain. He thought that his new disciple Kaiyan Wujin had actually bought this inn, so it would be easier for them to build up strength. Then he heard a knock on the door, and Ziyuyu entered the room. She introduced herself and showed Awai her sign. Ziyuyu asked if she could talk to him. A muscular man in a pink dress and cat ears said that here was their food, and that they should remember to leave a good review. Awai shuddered with hostility. Meanwhile, Ziyuyu was quietly drinking tea from her mug. She asked Awai what is this new service at the local tea house like. Awai replied that the service is, of course, good, but not everyone will like it. Ziyuyu said that she suggests getting straight to the point. She is the daughter of the head of the Iron Gate sect and she knows who Awai is. Awai choked on his tea at these words. Ziyuyu continued to say that if she understood correctly, then he is a mysterious martial artist who is pretending to be an ordinary mortal. Awai at first tensed and thought that he would really have to kill her, but after hearing her last words, he relaxed and replied that she must be joking, as she can see for herself, he is an ordinary mortal. Meanwhile, he thought that his disguise was almost revealed again, and how did he get caught in the first place? Apparently this Iron Gate sect is an organization of the country's government, which means that they are his enemies. Yu thought that her father was right when he said that true masters always remain humble. Yu said that as Awai knows, the demonic sect was destroyed, but some followers still managed to escape from them. Awai choked on his tea again and asked what he had to do with this. Yu shouted that she had a request to him. Every person is responsible for the prosperity of their world, and the Iron Gate sect is now short of people, and catching the criminals is urgent. Li Tzu-Wai was precisely the fugitive lord of the demonic sect. Yu said that she would like to ask Awai to help her catch the remaining followers of the demonic sect. She held out her hand and looked questioningly at Awai. Awai, chewing a piece of meat, thought with confusion, help catch himself. Test Ho. Awai enthusiastically asked Yu if she wanted to bring her here. Yu replied that yes, that's right. Awai started running around and saying that the appearance of this place is quite unusual, and I wonder what this examination hall is for. He thought to himself that if he thought like that, he would now visit the enemy base. Yu asked him in surprise, had he never taken a skill test? And then she thought that she had forgotten that a very powerful master was standing in front of her, and he must have simply never cared about such trifles. Yu said that several years ago, their Iron Gate sect began to create similar testing halls in order to test the strength of those who practice martial arts. Awai looked at her with respect. Yu continued to say that depending on how the test person performs, their Iron Gate sect will give the participant a jade tablet. Each rank has its own color, and her jade tablet is green, which means that she is a mid-stage practitioner. Yu extended her hand with a sign to Awai. He glanced at her and said, what about the martial spirit? What color tablet is given to a master of that level? Yu looked at him in shock and said that she didn't know. Awai looked at her in surprise. Yu said that to be honest, no one knows. To date there has been no one who has reached the martial spirit stage. However, it is said that for those who have reached this level, a heavenly staircase is opened, leading that master to another world. Awai thought that since he didn't know how strong the owner of his body was, it would be worth taking this test. But the problem is that I'm currently being watched by one of the enemy Iron Gate sect. Awai looked sideways at Yu with a dissatisfied look. Suddenly she grabbed him by the wrist and said what to think. He needed to go quickly, assuring him that this would only benefit him. Yu thought with a sly expression that she simply had to recruit Awai. If he joined the Iron Gate sect, then they would no longer have to worry about the escapees from the demonic sect. A distressed voice is heard from inside the building, asking how this is possible. Because the ball is transparent, it is not even white, and this means that there is not even the basics of martial arts. Awai looked at Yu with a puzzled expression. Awai thought that he didn't even have the basics of martial arts. It seems that the original owner of the body was able to hide his real strength even in front of this strange ball. How far-sighted is this? Li Tzu-Wai truly deserves the title of the strongest in the world. But Awai understood everything wrong. But immediately Awai thought that this ball meant nothing to him. It was enough for him to know that the owner of his body was the strongest martial artist in the world. Thinking for a moment, Yu thought that something was wrong here. From the very foundation of the testing hall, the ball had never been mistaken about the true strength of the practitioner. However, she saw with her own eyes the power of Awai and the boy. But then why did the ball remain transparent? Then Awai told Yu that if they were finished, then he would go. Then memories dawned on her. Wu Shen told little Yu that studying martial arts is like gradually realizing the Tao. The great truth is that the beginning of everything that exists is also the end, and that is why the highest realization of the Tao comes only after the practitioner returns to that with what did you start. Yu thought that she would return to where she started, so Awai has achieved the highest awareness of the Tao. She turned around but didn't see Awai. She ran out into the street and said where did he go? And then she heard Wu Shen's menacing voice coming from behind her. Wu Shen asked her what she was doing here. Wu Shen slammed his hand with a mug of tea on the table and shouted, what nonsense. He cannot believe that Yu thought of stealing the portrait of an escaped follower of the demonic sect. Yu knelt in front of him, trembling. Yu said in a trembling voice that she just wanted to help him, and besides, the portrait looked very strange. Wu Shen said how could she help them, and yes, for this portrait, their sect gave a lot of money to the artist, who has been doing this for many years. Wu Shen, saying that this is just a portrait and what could be wrong with it, unfolded the portrait and saw what was drawn on it, embarrassedly said that he would confiscate it. Yu looked at him with confusion. Here she said that although they destroyed the demonic sect, the founder of the sect and many of his other followers were still at large, and if they allowed them to gather forces again, it would be a disaster. Wu Shen, leisurely sipping tea, said that this had nothing to do with her, and all those who managed to escape are clearly the strongest followers of the demonic sect, and the strength of the Lord himself and that woman in the portrait is not something that can be taken so lightly. And at the moment, the demonic sect has been destroyed, so they should not rush, they need to think it over carefully. Yu said what would happen if a martial spirit stage master showed up. Wu Shen asked Yu's question with a dissatisfied look. Yu shouted, what would happen if a martial spirit stage master joined their sect? Near Cayenne Wujin's house, the boy and the owner of the house are training under the guidance of Awai sat surrounded by a pile of martial arts books, holding a blue and glowing talisman in his hand. Awai said that this magical talisman contains so many high-class techniques of the demonic sect. The former owner of this body truly deserves the title of the strongest in the world. Last time the boy proved that even beginner techniques can be very destructive. Maybe this time it's worth trying something new. Awai twirled some kind of package in his hands and said that he would do so. Awai went outside where the boy and Cayenne Wujin were. The boy asked that Awai had already finished, and what would they practice today? Not the same technique as last time. Awai replied with a proud smile that they would learn something else today. Yu walked to Awai's training place with her father and told him that let him trust her at least once, and he himself will understand everything when they come and she is not lying. Yu said with an angry expression that she personally saw Awai's disciple knock down a dozen huge trees with one blow. Wu Shen replied in an incredulous voice that it wasn't that he didn't believe her, it just sounded crazy. Meanwhile, Wu Shen thought about it. He thought that the boy had knocked down a dozen trees with one blow, and his master had destroyed a house with one finger. If someone had such enormous power, his name would have long ago thundered throughout Jianghu. For so many years there hasn't been a single master at the martial spirit stage, and then he suddenly showed up. It's all strange. Suddenly, Yu froze in place. Wu Shen asked her what happened to her, but Yu remained silent and looked into the distance in horror. A golden mist began to appear around the boy, and soon a golden statue appeared above him. Yu and Wu Shen watched from the side. Wu Shen literally went crazy in surprise and shouted what kind of horror was happening here. Then Wu Shen noticed that the golden hand of the statue was approaching them. He looked at her in horror. Wu Shen quickly reacted to this and shouted at Yu to move back. With a tremendous effort of will, Wu Shen created a golden dome above their heads, which was supposed to protect them from the blow. Wu Shen thought that perhaps this is the 9-bend heart defense formation. This is the final form of the bronze dome technique. Wu Shen thinks that if he channels all his spiritual energy into the dome, he will be able to withstand this blow. The huge golden statue put its hand on the dome and it began to crack. The boy shouted with delight that he had succeeded. Cayenne Wujin said with a disappointed face that they were doing exactly the same technique. Awai reassured Cayenne Wujin, saying that he should not despair, and every person has his own talents and perhaps martial arts is simply not his forte. Awai patted the boy's head and thought that the boy was indeed a promising talent and a real genius in the field of martial arts. While Awai was lost in his thoughts, Cayenne Wujin stood with tears in his eyes. Awai thought that since he was able to use the Tathagata poem, maybe he could also do other high-class techniques. Suddenly the three of them heard a cough. They turned around and saw Yu and Wu Shen. Yu asked desperately how was he. Wu Shen replied that she scared him. Awai asked Yu what they were doing here and who was lying next to her. Cayenne Wujin thought that Yu seemed familiar to him. Awai looked at Yu and Wu Shen in disbelief. Yu said that this was her father and she brought him to introduce them, but she did not expect that at this moment they would practice and Wu Shen tried to protect her. Wu Shen corrected the word protect to protect. Suddenly Wu Shen felt bad. Yu screamed in fear. Wu Shen tried to calm her down, saying that he was fine, but then blood gushed out of his mouth. Yu screamed again, "Where is he okay?" While Yu was wiping the blood from his face, Wu Shen told Awai to forgive him for coming uninvited and disturbing them and he hopes that they are not offended by him. Frowning, he thought, what does it mean that Yu told the truth and this child is incredibly strong? And even with all his strength, he could not really withstand his blow. The boy hid in fear behind Awai. Then Wu Shen realized that Awai was quite strange, and he did not feel a single drop of Kai from him. Awai looked at Wu Shen in disbelief. Wu Shen continued to wonder if Awai had reached the highest point of his cultivation, and they simply could not sense his true spiritual power. Wu Shen bowed to Awai and said that he had no intention of interrupting him from his martial arts practice, and yes, He is the head of the Iron Gate sect and Ziayu's father. Awai looked at him with confusion, and then it was as if he was electrocuted. Awai thought to himself that this could be the head of the Iron Gate sect himself. Wu Shen, not paying attention to the strange behavior of Awai, continued to say that this time he came with his daughter too. But Awai isolated only key words, and then Awai realized that this was the main boss of the enemy sect. The Iron Gate sect is home to many talented masters, unlike the Assassin list, which is only a list of people whose strength has been recognized by the common people, and membership in the Iron Gate sect can be equated to a high position in the Imperial Palace, and although it cannot act as freely like the members of the murder list, but they are supported by the Imperial Court itself. Qian Wujin thought that he could not believe that he had the chance to meet such a great person in his lifetime. Wu Shen bowed his head to Awai at this time. Wu Shen noticed that Awai continued to remain silent and thought that maybe he had said something wrong. Awai looks very fierce. Wu Shen was very scared and even choked. Awai was lost in thought, but then the boy called him. Awai asked the boy what happened and the boy replied that apparently Wu Shen had become ill. Wu Shen looked very tired. Awai looked at Wu Shen and thought that why was he so worried if they don't even know who he really is. Ziayu excitedly asked Wu Shen if he was okay. Awai smiled slyly and thought that, besides, he had already passed this cultivation test, and they would not suspect him, who does not even have the basics of cultivation, and it turns out that he can take advantage of the current situation and infiltrate the ranks of the enemy. Then Wu Shen said that apparently he would die before he became a true martial arts master. Awai asked him that it turns out he is the head of the Iron Gate sect, and if so, then he welcomes him. Wu Shen immediately jumped to his feet and happily replied that yes, that's right. And he is the head. He apologizes for interrupting their training. Ziayu exclaimed in horror that he should take care of himself. Awai said that there is no need to apologize, and he was just practicing a little with his students, and he is not a martial artist, but an ordinary person. Awai wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead with excitement. Wu Shen thought that apparently this powerful Awai does not want anyone to talk about his true strength, and now it is clear why he was so angry. After these thoughts, Wu Shen said that he was asking for forgiveness, and he misunderstood everything and asked his name. Awai replied that he could call him Awai, and Wu Shen bowed as a sign of respect. Wu Shen said that Awai should not speak so formally, and let him just call him Wu Shen. At this time, Ziayu watched their dialogue in bewilderment. Awai replied to Wu Shen that he could not treat his elders so impolitely. Wu Shen said that age does not mean anything, and he is sure that he is a great person, so he will feel awkward if Awai calls him uncle. Ziayu thought, what's going on here? The dialogue between Awai and Wu Shen continued. Wu Shen said that he heard from his daughter that the new manager of the local hotel was an unusually pleasant young man and decided to meet him personally. But it turned out that he came at the wrong time and interrupted the training. Awai kindly replied that he was grateful for such a high rating. Wu Shen smiled and replied that he only told the truth and Awai is too modest. He would like to ask him something. How was this boy able to learn the movement he recently did? Awai tensed a little from this question. Awai tried to get out of it by answering that Wu Shen was really talking about that technique. A huge building stands in the middle of the forest. The boy with the broom in his hand tells Zhu-kun that he seems to have seen a manifestation of the Tathagata. Zhu-kun smiled, patted the boy on the head and replied that he also saw it. Zhu-kun with a calm face said that this was a true manifestation of the Tathagata and the boy had long wanted to come down from the mountain and see the world, hadn't he? And let him call his elder brother here. The boy was very surprised and asked what Zhu-kun wanted to say, that he could go downstairs. Zhu-kun replied that the tournament would start soon and he felt that this time everything would be much more interesting. The boy got angry and irritably replied that Zhu-kun was speaking in riddles again. Wu Shen and Ziayu said goodbye to Awai and the boy. Awai thought to himself that it turns out that it's not so easy to hint to people to leave. He imagined that he was telling Wu Shen that maybe he also wanted to try to learn martial techniques, and Wu Shen replied that of course it was possible. Awai thought about it and realized that he had given him an incomplete version of the technique, so if he wanted to learn it, he would return it himself. Still, he is an enemy, and he should be careful with this. Suddenly the boy took Awai by the hand. Awai asked what was the matter and the boy replied that he must have caused trouble. Awai was very surprised by the boy's words and reassured him, saying that no, it was not his fault at all, and it was he who did not check the surroundings. Awai thought to himself that besides, that Wu Shen seems to have no idea about his true identity at all, and as long as he stays in the shadows, he has absolutely nothing to worry about. Awai told the boy that he could rest for now, and he would go for a short walk. At this time, he thought that, however, the boy's talent was simply incredible. He mastered one technique after another without any problems, and it would be difficult to keep him in the shadows. The boy entered the house and took off his hat, from under which his long hair fell out. It turned out that the boy is not at all who he claims to be, and he is a girl. This boy's name is Xiao Shuai. Xiao Shuai said that the master was so kind to him, which meant that he had to work even harder. Xiao Shuai smiled as he sat on the chair. Owai approached the mountain. He looked around and said that he didn't know how destructive this technique would be if he used it himself, but it was still worth a try. Then a cough came from the mountain. Owai asked if anyone was there. Sitting on a stone, the girl said that how was it possible that she had not yet had time to sufficiently heal her wounds, and they had already somehow found her. The fiery hand crashed into the rock. The girl groaned in pain and thought that she could not die here and her master was still waiting for her. He spat blood and began to lose consciousness. Her eyes closed and she thought that she couldn't lose consciousness now and needed to collect all the spiritual energy that she had left. Owai came closer to her. The girl thought that this smell was very familiar to her and it reminded her of the master. Owai asked her if everything was okay. Owai pulled the unconscious girl out of the stones. There is a basin of bloody water on the nightstand and dirty bandages scattered everywhere. Owai wearily tilted his head to the side and drank some water. He thought it had been a really tough night for him, but he had managed it, and luckily he had watched a whole bunch of science videos so he already knew what to do in these situations. The girl said quietly, "Master." Owai thought that she was in so much pain, but she still continued to think about her master. Then Owai hears that some girl asked him if he woke up. Owai asked if something had happened and the girl replied that Ziyu said she wanted to talk to Owai. Owai asked her who she was and then Ziyu came into the house. Owai tensely closed the door of the room in which the girl was lying and asked why she had come. Ziyu extended her hand to him with the bag in it. Owai looked at the bag with confusion and tried to open it, but Ziyu shouted that she shouldn't open it right here. Then the girl with ashen hair heard an explosion in the house. A pile of scrolls and papers fell from the bag. Owai said with rage that he almost died and asked Owai that it was really a spatial bag. Owai started raking through the scrolls, asking Ziyu, "What is this?" Ziyu replied with a tense look that, to be honest, all of this was passed down by her father. Wu Shen, standing with a scroll in his hand and looking at it lustfully, said that he would never have thought in his life that such a powerful technique existed in the world. He says that in order for Ziyu to open their treasury, she must thank Owai as soon as possible and she will personally present him with their gift. Ziyu began to bend her fingers and say that there were all kinds of pills, techniques and weapons of their sect. Her father allowed her to bring everything that was in his treasury so that Owai could choose the real gift himself. Then Ziyu waved one scroll in front of his face and said that she almost forgot about this scroll. Wu Shen said that their hotel is the biggest in Yuhan, so they should have a lot of visitors. Ziyu smiled happily at Owai. Owai unrolled the scroll with interest. Ziyu continued to say that this scroll depicts the escaped followers of the demonic sect, and if Owai sees any of them, he will have to report them to the Iron Gate sect, and a high reward has been assigned for each of them. Owai thought that luck had smiled on him again and his enemies themselves had sent him a list of his followers. While Owai was studying the scroll, Ziyu told him that, for example, this girl in the portrait, let him not look at her innocent appearance. In fact, she is a real murder weapon, which was personally created by the demon lord Owai. Once, in just one night, she destroyed as many as 3 small sects that dared to rebel against her lord. And by the way, Ziyu heard that she was hiding somewhere in the vicinity of Yuhan, so their sect was a little worried about this. Suddenly, Owai remembers how he pulled the girl out from under the stones and realized that it was the same girl depicted on the scroll. This shocked Owai. Ziyu noticed this and tried to calm him down, saying that she thought that girl would not do something like that. Ziyu smelled the smell from Owai's clothes. She started sniffing and Owai jumped back in fear. Ziyu asked Owai why he smells of blood. Is he injured or someone else? Owai hesitantly replied that he didn't know and thought that how could she even understand that he smelled of blood. Ziyu glanced warily at the bedroom. She also reeks of blood. Owai noticed this and blocked the girl's path, spreading his arms wide at the entrance. Ziyu asked him why he was so excited and she was now even more interested in what was inside. She said that she was sure that his room was covered in blood and opened the door wide. Owai thought in fear that now he would definitely see everything. Ziyu looked at the bed with a smug look and said that as she thought, there was a lot of blood on his bed and Owai should have immediately said that he was injured. Ziyu saw bloody clothes thrown on the bed. Owai thought with surprise that the wanted girl heard the noise outside the door and ran away. Owai approached Ziyu and said that she had misunderstood everything, and this was not his blood. Yesterday on the hill he found a wounded kitten and decided to take it with him, and after treating the wounds, the kitten immediately fell asleep, and then just as suddenly disappeared. Meanwhile, he thought that he could not believe that he had accidentally stumbled upon a follower of the former owner of this body. The wounded girl was sitting above the bed. Yu told Awai that almost no one breeds cats in their city, and perhaps it was brought by students of the Wangu Palace, and it is a pity that this kitten ran away. The Wangu Palace would very generously thank Awai for returning the kitten. Awai asked about Wangu Palace. Yu happily answered him that the Sword Path tournament would soon be held there, and therefore the disciples of Wangu Palace arrived in Yuhan. And cats are their sacred animal, so Wangu investigators often take cats or cats with them. And she forgot to warn him that in this Yuhan has been chosen as one of the tournament's arenas, so it will be quite lively for a while. Awai clenched his fists. Yu continued to tell him not to forget about the list of fugitives that he gave to Awai, since he would soon have a lot of guests, so a couple of them might drop by. Awai bared his teeth furiously and thought that Wangu Palace, they poisoned him with centipede poison, but he can't use his strength to deal with them. They will quickly reveal him. Returning to his previous appearance, he asked Yu if he could still sign up for the tournament. Yu replied that yes, it is possible, and does he really want to enroll his student? Awai, closing the door, said that yes, although he is very young, it will be useful for him to gain real experience. Yu pleasantly told him that Awai is a very good master. Awai replied that in fact the boy is very talented in his own right, and Awai is simply supporting him. I thought to myself that it would be suspicious if immediately after the disappearance of the demon lord Li Tsuwai, a master comparable in strength to him appeared, so he would simply deal with them with the hands of the boy, while he himself watched this from the shadows. Awai would never miss such a perfect opportunity to take revenge. Standing outside the door, Awai wondered how he would find the escaped followers of his sect. The girl sitting above the bed jumped down. She touched Awai's clothes with her hand and thought that she couldn't make a mistake and brought his clothes to her face. It was the scent of her master Li Tsuwai. The Sword Path tournament is a competition among sword masters, which was jointly established by the three great sects. But soon the sword ceased to be the main attribute of the tournament. Masters of other martial arts also began to participate in it, as the winner was awarded magnificent pills, artifacts, and so on. The winner will not only make himself known to the entire Jianghu, but will have the opportunity to contact the three great sects and climb to the top of this world. Therefore, for many martial artists, participation and victory in this tournament became the goal of their whole life. And, of course, among the participants there are especially talented practitioners. A cry is heard from the hotel, "Master!" All visitors turn in horror towards this sound. Kaian Wujin yells with tears in his eyes that he also wants to participate in the tournament. Awai, with a sad expression on his face, put his hand on Kaian Wujin's shoulder and said that it was not that he did not want to take him with him, but that he needed someone to cover for him, and Kaian Wujin was perfect for this role, since Awai trusts him very much. When she and Xiao Shuai go to the tournament, the hotel will remain there. He looked at Kaian Wujin with a stern expression. Kaian Wujin could barely hold back his tears. Suddenly he shouted that he would be waiting for him here and would look after the hotel, and waved his white handkerchief goodbye. Awai thought with a serious expression that these words coming from Kaian Wujin's mouth sounded very strange. A man shouted from the crowd why another person stood in the middle of the road. Couldn't he see that not everyone had received their license plates yet? The angry man tried to move the man away, but the man stuck to one point. He looked at Awai and Xiao Shuai. They were dressed in golden armor. Xiao Shuai asked Awai in fear why everyone was looking at them like that. But Awai thought that this is what it's like to be in a god costume. Envious glances are flying from everywhere, and it will probably be a little difficult to walk around in such an outfit. It's better to take it off for now. He glanced at the crowd out of the corner of his eye and thought that something was wrong here. He noticed with surprise that this tournament was really prestigious, and there were only old people and sick people around. Awai heard a sound from behind. A group of muscular men approached him, and one of them told him that it was apparently his first time participating in the tournament, and he would not help with all these treasures, so he could give them to him out of the kindness of his heart. Awai calmly replied that this was a gift from his student as a sign of gratitude to his master, and he could not throw away his gifts. In fact, the source of the finance was Kaian Wujin. The man looked at Awai angrily and asked him why he refused. Was he really trying to humiliate him? Suddenly Awai saw someone in the crowd and decided that it looked like the tournament was about to begin. The girl handed out scrolls to the participants. Awai saw this and told the man that he was going and they would talk later. The man did not know how to answer this. Awai took the scroll from the girl's hands and thought that the man looked like a supporting character, and he thought that he was eliminated in the first stage of the tournament. And in general, it was better not to pay attention and focus on his goal. The girl who was handing out scrolls with tasks announced that everyone had received tasks, and the first stage of the tournament would last 12 hours and start in half an hour. She wished everyone good luck. Awai looked at the scroll and was surprised. He said that this is a tournament of martial artists, and why do they force them to collect herbs? He feels like a worker who is hired for nothing. Awai sighed wearily. Awai stretched tiredly. He said disappointedly that he could not find a single blade of grass even if he had photographs of these herbs. What a pity, but it seems they will have to refuse to participate. The bald boy who was standing next to him told someone to be careful. Awai and Xiao Shuai were lying near the fire. Xiao Shuai was already asleep. The same men who tried to take away Awai's treasures were discussing something in the bushes. One of the men asked that they had been watching Awai for half a day. Maybe they would already get down to business. It didn't look like he was some kind of master, most likely just a fool who came to watch the fights of real masters. The other man answered him that he agreed with his words and that Awai does not have the intelligence, since he came to the square in treasure with a child. Even one blow would be enough for him. The most important of them said that they would sell all his wealth. They would earn as much as they would not have earned in 20 years on orders alone. And he also noticed his spatial bag, and there must be even more treasures there. They rushed screaming at the sleeping Awai, but then suddenly they were covered by a net. They fell to the ground, all entangled in the net, and began shouting what was going on here and who dared to interfere with his plans. Suddenly Awai stood up and hung the nets on the tree. Awai slowly said that as he expected, they are just a bunch of minor characters who don't stick around for long. The men screamed in horror. Awai exhaled angrily and laughed. On his arm were spider webs that were worth 25,688 silver. He jumped and released the web. At this time, he thought that he felt like a real Spider-Man. The men screamed in horror, and Awai continued to say that they didn't think he was a complete fool. Right from the very beginning, Awai deliberately walked around with treasures in plain sight, and pretended to be a rich guy who fancied himself a martial arts master. Awai knew that some fools would definitely fall for his treasures. He remembered looking out of the corner of his eye at one of the men and thinking that the guy was definitely trying very hard to steal his armor. And then Awai said that he arranged all this on purpose. These words caused one of the men to have a panic attack. Awai, looking at the man, said that now he understands why the villains love to manipulate people, because the sensations are incredible, and okay, it's time for them to get down to business. To be honest, Awai is not very familiar with this area. He didn't want to glow for a while, but he was given no choice. He leaned over the men with an evil smile and asked them if they would help him with something. Xiaoyu told the girl sitting opposite that she was the one assigned to lead the tournament. The girl sitting opposite told her that there was nothing to be done. No one knew what was on the emperor's mind. And by the way, didn't her father tell her about this? She picked up the cup. Xiaoyu, turning away, said that he didn't tell her anything, and recently they haven't talked at all. Now all he does is train. He doesn't even get out of his room. The girl twirled the cup in her hand. As it turned out, her name was Meng Qiankyu. Meng Qiankyu asked Xiaoyu that her father was really training. And this is very strange, because he was never able to break through to the stage of the Saint of War, although he had long been fluent in the 9-bend heart defense technique. When stagnation occurs at this level of cultivation, it becomes incredibly difficult to break through to the next stage. Usually masters do not manage to break through for the rest of their lives, so Xiaoyu had better dissuade him from this idea. Xiaoyu said thoughtfully that Meng Qiankyu knows her father and no one could ever convince him, and she certainly couldn't do it, and it was better to just forget about it. Then Xiaoyu said that she wanted to tell about the fact that she met the hiding master. Meng Qiankyu was very tense at Xiaoyu's words. She put her hand on Xiaoyu's shoulder and yelled that Xiaoyu had really taken a liking to some man of unknown origin again. But does anyone even know what sect he is from, who his teacher is, and where he comes from? Meng Qiankyu literally rose in rage. She loomed over Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu told her that her face was too formidable now. Xiaoyu timidly explained to her so that she would not worry. Her father had already sent someone to get information about Awai. And besides, this master loves small animals very much and even sheltered an orphan child. That's how generous he is. Without a doubt he is a great man. Meanwhile, Awai loomed menacingly over one of the men. The man handed him a black root. Awai took the root in his hands and examined it. He said that this really is the same black ginseng, and for some reason this root is not at all similar to the one in the picture, and this one is more like what his mother made soup from. One of the men was very surprised by his words and thought that it was impossible that a wise mother would cook him black ginseng soup. But how rich is he? What a wastefulness this is. A man will never understand the whims of the rich. And then a Y tells the men that they have done their job and can now go. The men are surprised and ask again that he will really let them go. A Y replies that why doesn't he think so? Do they really think that they are worthy of a person of such a position as him getting his hands dirty about them? A Y thought that if he kills them, then there won't be any problems. So also burying corpses is too troublesome. So a Y, with a smile on his face, told the men that since they were fellow villains, he could give them one simple piece of advice. A Y had made so much cannon fodder. He meant his videos that he had learned how to easily get rid of one time. Here he talks about those videos that didn't fly. And to reach the top, martial arts mastery alone is not enough. It is also important to have a head on your shoulders. The man thought with horror that he had just heard that getting rid of disposables, and this means that he is saying that in this way he can easily get rid of bodies that have served their purpose. The man grabbed his comrades and with a frightened cry said that they were leaving. A Y looked after them in surprise and asked what kind of reaction this was. The next day, A Y barely opened his eyes and looked at the world with a sleepy look. Xiao Shuai happily told the master that he had finally woken up. A Y yawned and asked what time it was. Xiao Shuai replied that A Y probably meant time and said that it was dog hour. Suddenly A Y felt that Xiao Shuai had given him some kind of fruit. A Y asked him in surprise what this was all about. It looked like a sugar apple. Xiao Shuai, pointing his finger at a small pile, said that he took it from that pile, and when he woke up, this mountain was already there. A Y looked there with confusion. A Y told Xiao Shuai that it was really such a big pile, and it would be good to put it all in a bag first, and then take out as much as needed. That's why they were lucky. Xiao Shuai agreed with A Y. A woman from the sect was watching them. She smiled as she looked at A Y. A piece of black ginseng was placed on the table right in front of Meng Qianqiu. She looked at it with disgust and said that this was a complete failure, and let this disgusting thing be removed from her as quickly as possible. She angrily continued to say that she had said that there was no point in this. It would be better if they ordered a large batch from the traders. The woman told her not to say that and that this year the weather was not pleasant and therefore the harvest was badly damaged. The great sects cannot afford to take and follow the lead of unscrupulous traders who brazenly inflated the price of black ginseng. Meng Qianqiu was surprised and asked the woman why she thought so. The merchants simply wanted free things, hiding behind nobility, and this is very disgusting. They still dare to put all this dirty work on them. Wangu Palace. This is akin to the fact that her own mother poured poison into her daughter's wine. Suddenly a Y walked up to the counter. He asked the woman if this was the right place to sell ginseng. Meng Qianqiu wondered when this would finally end. A Y looked into the bag with a thoughtful look and said that her assignment was too vague and he didn't know whether he brought it or not. Meng Qianqiu leaned her elbows on the table and, knocking on the table with a dissatisfied look, was surprised how the task could be vague if she herself drew pictures of herbs. Suddenly her eyes lit up with surprise. She sat up at the table, not believing that in front of her was ginseng of the highest quality in such large quantities, because so much is impossible to find even if you dig up a mountain of earth. She opened her mouth in surprise and leaned on the table, and the woman in red standing behind her was also surprised. A Y scratched his ear and said that the task did not specify the required quantity, so they could choose how much they needed. The court saint was even more shocked that the guy didn't even understand what he brought them. He thought for a moment and asked if he had brought the wrong thing. The girl took the root and joyfully said that this was what she needed, and, in fact, all she needed to complete it was one root of inferior quality, and the guy invited her to take the whole bunch. The girls were shocked by this proposal, wondering how he didn't realize how valuable this thing was. The guy said that they just found them somewhere in the forest, and he didn't like the taste of these roots, so he would gladly give them away. Meng Qianqiu couldn't believe how he could find these roots in the forest so easily, and how could he not like their taste. She frowned and thought that someone had deliberately started the task of the first stage of the tournament a long time ago, so everyone knew that it was Wangu Palace that would collect black ginseng. The girl thought that this guy brought ginseng as a gift to improve relations with Wangu Palace. She smiled contentedly and thought about how generous this guy really was, and that this was enough to contact Wangu Palace. Meng Qianqiu with great self-confidence told the guy that now he can contact her without any formalities, since he helped her a lot and proved his righteousness. Awai looked at her puzzled, not understanding what kind of righteousness the girl was talking about, so she explained that Wangu Palace accepted his gift and was ready to have a good relationship with him. The guy thought about the Wangu Palace with even greater misunderstanding. The girl extended her hand to him and introduced herself, saying that she was a saint of Wangu Palace and her name was Meng Jianqiu, and asked what the guy's name was. Then you could see what kind of drawing Meng Jianqiu had drawn for the task, and it looked like an incomprehensible black blob. Jian Wujin, Awai, Zhao Shuai and Meng Jianqiu walked along a street lined with small stalls and Chinese houses. Jian Wujin fanned himself and was extremely happy to be invited to the official venue of the sword tournament. He decided that he would forever imprint this glorious moment in his heart. He smiled and looked at Awai with happy eyes, holding his hand and saying that it was so good that he no longer needed to look after the inn, so from now on he would consider Awai his resurrected father. Awai got angry and tried to push him away, shouting for the guy to let go of his hand, because if he didn't let go of it now, he would go back to guarding the inn. Jian Wujin began to look around, asking if this was really the official venue of the tournament, since it was not visible by looking around, and there were no people there at all. Meng Jianqiu replied that it was obvious, since this place had long ago fallen under the influence of the three great sects, so there were no people here. She added that the first stage of the tournament is a trap that only a few can overcome, and also that direct invitations to the tournament were sent to all major sects, so powerful masters who missed the first stage have already gathered here, and those who passed the first stage cannot always reach the second, since not everyone has enough skill. Awai said that it felt like he had come into contact with the dark side of this world. The girl supported him and said that it was not easy to get to the second stage, but since he helped her so much, she got the last 3 passes for him. The guy clapped without much joy, not understanding how he helped her, but said that the holy lady was very kind to him. The girl led them further past the large palace and said that food and overnight accommodation were provided for the duration of the tournament, and offered to take them to the hotel. Jian Wujin walked behind everyone, upset, feeling that everyone had already forgotten about him. The girl took Zhao Shuai in her arms and said that he was probably completely tired of walking, and offered to take him in her arms. The boy did not understand why this was necessary, because he was not tired at all. Awai looked at the girl in confusion and wondered if this saint could be trusted at all, because such a self-confident and attention-hungry girl was too easy to deceive. They reached a building with a golden inscription, where it was written that it was a hotel. The girl put the boy on the ground and said that she needed to give them something and asked them not to lose it. She threw the thing into Awai's hands and he caught it, asking what it was. In his hands were wooden pendants with inscriptions and a whistle. The girl said that these were membership cards that would be needed during registration, and the whistle was her gift to Awai. If you whistle at it, then someone from the Wangu Palace will definitely come to the rescue. The guy took the whistle with his fingers and began to examine it in surprise, thinking that it was made from someone's bone. The girl said that there was only one such whistle and it was very difficult for her to get it, so it shouldn't be used just like that. Awai at the same moment, without thinking, blew on the whistle and said that it doesn't whistle, and Meng Jianqiu got angry and shouted that she said that you can't whistle on it just like that. Then Awai, Zhao Shuai and Jian Wujin separated from the girl and entered the hotel, and Awai was surprised that it looked like a 5-star hotel. They stood in a luxurious living room and a group of men with weapons who were sitting there looked back at them. Jian Wujin became amused and, waving his fan, told Awai that if he liked it that way, when he returned, he would hire workers to remodel their hotel in a similar style. They approached the old man with a book in his hands and asked him to write them down. The man asked how many there were, and Awai replied that there were 3 of them and handed over the cards for registration. Someone behind them suddenly said that they obviously mixed something up by coming here with a child. It was a girl in a red dress who added that this is not a place to play, so they should go back to where they came from. Some drunk bald old man with a pot of alcohol in his hands answered her and asked why she was so concerned about the affairs of others and why she decided that children could not participate in the tournament, because then the same could be said about such an ignorant girl like her. These words angered the girl and she said that she was just trying to give useful advice. The old man leaned his elbows on the table and said that she had heard everything correctly and continued to drink. She curled her mouth with anger and said that there was no point in talking to someone like him who was unable to distinguish good intentions from bad. The old man turned to Awai and asked him not to pay attention to these people, since in this world they respect strength and do not pay attention to gender and age. He laughed and added that a mere child could not get here, so everyone here should be considered equal. He also said that since Awai and his friends were here for the first time, they could turn to him for any help. Why did not know what to answer and simply looked at the old man, and then thanked him for his concern and bowed. The old man replied that this was a small thing for him, and Hongzhu was watching everything that was happening. Calling a Y, she embarrassedly hugged herself and thought that she was in great pain because she could not come to him, although he was so close. She put a finger to her mouth and thought about how much she missed the master, especially the red birthmark on his chest. She imagined a Y's portrait and thought that she would recognize the master's beautiful aura even if he changed his appearance. Hongzhu watched him from the second floor, hiding behind a curtain, and the guy intensely felt that someone was watching him. Everyone went to their rooms, and a Y lay on the bed, looking at the whistle. He remembered Mang Jianqiu's words about the purpose of the whistle and put it on his face, thinking that if he used the whistle to capture someone from Wanggu Palace and find out information, he would definitely become a suspect. When suddenly he was frightened by someone's scream. He jumped out of bed, not understanding what was happening, and Jian Wuzhen burst into his room, holding Xiao Shuai in one hand. He turned to a Y and said that something unimaginable was happening, pointing to the door. Meanwhile, on the street, black thorny vines were crushing the ground, entangling people, and someone said that the tournament had already begun and a battle to the death was taking place. The voice apologized, saying that they themselves had made the wrong choice. Someone's scream was heard on the street near the hotel, and the vines let go of the corpse of some guy. The man bowed to the girl, calling her big sister and saying that they were done here. This girl turned out to be the same girl in red who was rude to a Y. She grinned and said we could move on to the next place. Black vines soared up against the background of the night sky, and the girl said that they would definitely be the winners of this tournament. Two tall buildings were visible from the darkness of the night, when suddenly something blew them up. A large beam of light brought down buildings, followed by several more multicolored beams, destroying everything around. An elderly man with a black bandage on his head held a staff at the ready and said that he did not know that his old acquaintances would be here. The man in the yellow robe, surrounded by flying gold leaves, told him that he had not seen him for 4 years, so he hoped that the man would not disappoint him. A girl in a purple dress and purple hair held an umbrella over her head and said that she was already feeling nauseous from the sight of these old people. They looked at each other and shouted that it was time for them to decide which of them was stronger, and this battle would be the last. 3 multicolored beams of energy shot up and an explosion occurred underneath them. The man in yellow clothes concentrated the golden sheets in front of him and pointed them with his hand at the girl, and she created shields in front of her, laughing and wondering if this is all he can do, and he should have known that he would lose because he is a seer. The old man watched them fight and said that one was using tricks and the other was insulting everyone, and that today he would show them the strength of a real martial artist. He jumped and swung his staff, which glowed with blue energy, and struck. Jian Wuzhen saw a huge flash of blue energy behind the buildings and was amazed and happy because he saw a battle between the strongest martial artists. While behind him a huge ball of energy flew into the sky. He joyfully said that the masters of all major sects were gathering here to show their skills and compete for first place. He added that it was exhilarating and scary at the same time. Meanwhile, the old man in the headband fought with the girl in the purple dress and shouted to her that he did not want to waste his strength on her techniques, and she told him to shut up, because she knows that he secretly announced a monetary reward for her murder. Y was disappointed that these masters came here to solve their personal problems, and turned around to see 3 guys with swords behind him. They looked at Y and Jian Wuzhen angrily. One of them shouted that he had finally found them and ordered the other 2 to grab the registration cards. Y recognized them as the guys who pestered them during the day, and Jian Wuzhen ran out in front of him, asking the master to take care. He raised his hands and threw papers at the attackers, and one of the guys was happy because they were bank checks. The main character and his partner disappeared, which surprised the attackers and they realized that they had been deceived. One of them sat down and began to collect the fallen checks, saying that there was no point in running after them and it was easier to find another target. When suddenly something struck him and he froze in shock, and then fell exhausted right in front of his accomplices, who were afraid of the enemy attack. Hongzhu appeared, holding a sword in her hands and moving towards them. She asked if they were trying to harm her beloved master, since she felt his powerful aura there. Meanwhile, Xiao Shuai was flying somewhere and holding his partners in his hands. The 3 masters who were fighting among themselves stopped, sensing a powerful aura, and Hongzhu, who beat those guys, looked back, sensing a holy war rank master. She took the cards of the guys she struck and counted them, took out a ring and enclosed the power of the cards in it. She closed her eyes in pleasure and thought that when she reached 520 cards, she would give this spatial ring to the master, and this would be the perfect chance to reunite with him. The flying boy landed on the roof and asked if Jian Wujin, who was vomiting, was okay. His face turned blue and he asked the boy next time to hold him at least by his belt and not by his collar, because he was almost suffocated. He asked the Y what they would do next, and he said with a smile that he wanted to watch the show unfold. Jian Wujin was confused when suddenly a Y threw him a fried chicken, and he lay down on the sun loungers with the boy and invited him to lie with them in the best places. Jian Wujin did not understand why the master carried all this with him, and a Y was eating popcorn and answered him that he himself told him that he really wanted to participate in the tournament, but now he refuses. He added that there is no need to worry so much because the master took care of everything. A Y said that the essence of the second stage of the challenge is to collect cards for registration, so the more cards they collect, the higher their ranking will be. He suggested waiting until the end of the massacre and taking the cards from the one who had the most of them left. Jian Wujin was amazed by his master's wisdom and joined him and the boy. A Y was eating popcorn when suddenly red and black vines hit their resting place and grabbed Xiao Shuai, who was scared and could not move. Ziayu's father sat cross-legged with his eyes closed and held a scroll in his hands, while everything around him glowed. Suddenly he opened his eyes and was shocked and looked at his hand, saying that he was overwhelmed with power. He presented a golden statue of Buddha and joyfully shouted that this was absolutely pure spirit energy. The man cried with joy, because he could not imagine that there was a technique in the world that would be ideally combined with his technique called 9-bend heart protection. He decided to finish his training and immediately go to take revenge on those who called him an old loser. He looked at the scroll and realized that there were still many shortcomings in the scroll, so he would wait for the next meeting with a Y and ask him for advice. The man came out of his room and was glowing with happiness, and the young guy bowed to him and asked how his training went, which he completed. The man said that everything went well, and the guy replied that he was happy for the master and that nothing happened during his absence. Ziayu walked up to her father and greeted him, and he called his daughter over and said that he wanted to show her something. He extended his hand to her and performed his technique, and everything around began to shine. A golden glow began to surround the girl, and she said that this is the 9-bend heart defense formation, but there is something wrong with this technique. The father told her to take a closer look, and the girl began to look around in surprise and, looking at her feet, saw that she was standing on a large golden lotus. She said in surprise that this was the golden Tathagata lotus that they had seen that day. Her father smiled and said that she had guessed right. He added that although his technique is designed for protection and is considered a powerful combat technique, it has one significant drawback. Since this technique is only intended for defense, he cannot reach his full potential in attack. He extended his hand in front of him and a streak of golden energy appeared from his hand. The man said that for many years he had been looking for a technique that would help improve his formation technique, but he did not expect to find it after walking with his daughter. He was very happy and imagined himself sitting on a golden lotus, surrounded by magical hands and swords, and said that when he completely mastered the technique, he would be able to attack and defend. His daughter watched this silently, and the man added that it was all thanks to a Y and asked her how this guy was doing. Ziayu said that a Y was out of town now, which shocked her father. He was so upset that he fell to the floor and said that he couldn't believe a Y left without saying goodbye. The man was disappointed that their acquaintance lasted so short. Ziayu explained that the maids at the guy's inn said that he left with his students because he wanted to accompany them to the tournament, and most likely he is there now. Her father stood up and asked his daughter to talk about such important things right away next time, because he is too impressionable. He thought that if his daughter had told him about a Y's departure in advance, he would have issued him several direct invitations. But then he suggested that most likely a Y had already qualified for the second stage of the tournament, because the first stage is very difficult and can be lost quickly. The girl frowned and said that he himself locked himself in the room and did not want to listen to anyone, so she could not tell in advance. Meanwhile, her father continued to ponder why such a powerful a Y would go to such a tawdry tournament in the first place. He decided that a Y combined composure and generosity and wanted his students to have time to see the world. The man thought about what a great master a Y is. Meanwhile, at the tournament, a frightened Jian Wujin watched as the red vines carried away Xiao Shuai, and thought that this was the end. A woman's voice said that she warned that this place was not for children. The owner of the vines turned out to be a girl in red clothes, who insulted a Y and his students during the day. She told them to just give up and leave the tournament because she didn't want to hurt the kids. Awai poked his finger at the red vines and thought that they were too strange to the touch. Jian Wujin screamed in panic that Xiao Shuai had been grabbed and waved his arms. The girl looked at Awai with displeasure and did not understand what was wrong with him, because he did not pay attention to the fact that she grabbed the baby. In addition, she did not sense the spiritual energy of a martial arts practitioner in him and decided that an ordinary person had entered the tournament. Meanwhile, Awai continued to stroke the vines and realized that the vines were like the slime from the book. He took the vine in his hands, and the other guy stood behind him. The girl could not understand what was happening, because an ordinary person cannot get into the sword tournament. She also couldn't sense the spiritual energy from Jian Wujin and thought that they were using a technique that allowed them to hide the power. Awai was holding a vine in his hands and thinking about something with a grin, while his student was shaking with fear. The girl was angry and did not understand why hide her strength if, on the contrary, she had to show it at the tournament. Jian Wujin was very scared and thought that although both the master and the boy are very strong, but in the tournament, every second person could end up at the king stage, so there is no time to be distracted by weak opponents. He looked at his master's back and was shocked that he stood calmly and did not lose control of the situation even when Xiao Shuai was grabbed. The guy looked at Awai with admiration, thinking that he looked even more majestic from behind. Awai examined the vine and said that it was created from internal energy and that he would like to be able to do the same. He reached into his pocket, saying that Xiao Shuai could handle it without his help, and that he didn't want to miss the opportunity. The girl was afraid that the guy was going to attack. Awai took out a huge sword from the bag and said with a grin that he would cut himself some of the vine, and then study it. The old man who helped Awai at the inn drank from the pot and said that he did not think that a master of the Holy War stage would appear in such a wilderness. He walked along the broken street and said that it was worth persuading this master to join his Yuden sect, and that his aura was somewhere in this direction. He saw a girl in a red dress on the roof, holding Xiao Shuai in the vines and screaming and asking Awai what was wrong with him. The old man asked in surprise what was going on there, and the girl was angry and shouted that she actually had this guy's student hostage, and that Awai should show at least a little respect to her student. The old man looked at the girl on the roof and recognized her as the girl from the hotel who threatened the child. He noticed that she had the aura of an early-stage war king. Meanwhile, the girl continued to scream and threaten that if Awai did not pay attention to her, she would hurt his student. Suddenly, a bright ray of light hit her shoulder, and the old man flew up to the roof and pulled out Xiao Shuai, shouting that this girl was completely crazy to mock a child. He shouted that there were hundreds of thousands of masters in the arena, but she decided to attack this company, and that she was apparently too weak to fight masters of her level. The girl got angry at him, not understanding where he came from, and said that someone had already collected most of the participants' cards, and she didn't want to lose, so she had no choice. She added that she was simply defending herself and the child himself provoked her. The old man pointed at Awai and said that he saw everything with his own eyes, and that this guy could not even emit Jai energy and all he had was an old sword that was covered in cracks. The girl curled her mouth with anger and said that she was tired of everything. She raised her hands and screamed, activating her soul-devouring technique. She began to hit the old man with vines, and he jumped off the roof, and then she grabbed Awai with the vine, which shocked Jian Wujin. The girl told Awai that he decided to tease her since he was still hiding his strength, so she decided to force him to show his skills. The old man landed on the roof, holding a child in his arms, and said that this girl is strong, because she knows the technique of devouring souls. Xiao Shuai told him that his master is very strong and he can handle everything, and these words touched the old man, and he said that in the eyes of a child, the master always looks the most powerful and reliable. The old man added that his master was good, since he decided to fight with a superior opponent in order to save his student. He said that this girl would be hard to stop, since her technique would not stop until she drained all the Jai energy from the victim and reached the Tanshin. After this, the master will never be able to use his energy, so nothing will help him. Awai was still entangled in the vine, and Jian Wujin tried to call him. Suddenly the vines began to let go of Awai, which shocked the girl and the old man. The girl could not understand how this happened, because the technique can only be interrupted if the victim is not a martial artist or if the Jai energy of the victim is much greater than the Jai energy of the owner of the technique. Awai's eyes were completely empty, and then he was surprised and thought that her technique was too weak and that he was expecting something stronger, and the vines had already completely let him go. The girl's face clenched in pain and she coughed, and then she got angry and didn't think about who this guy was. The old man was also surprised and thought that it couldn't be that this guy was exactly who he thought about. Suddenly, someone jumped onto the roof and a girl with white hair and a blindfold picked up a Y and took off. He looked at her and thought he recognized her. The girl landed on the roof in front of everyone and hugged a Y, happily calling him a master, which confused the guy. She looked at him with loving eyes and apologized that she came to him too late and he had to fight himself, but she was confident in his strength and that he could defeat everyone. She handed him the ring and said that there were more than 520 member cards in this spatial ring, and that this ring symbolized her endless love for the master. She got down on one knee and wanted to put the ring on his finger. The girl said that the master changed his appearance and entered into the tournament, probably in order to take revenge on the 3 clans that are participating here. She added that she did not expect anything less from the master, because he always knew how to build brilliant intrigues, and that she hoped that the cards would help him. Y didn't understand what intrigues the girl was talking about and who she was. He became confused and asked who she was, which upset her. The girl cried and asked why the master was still angry with her, and reminded her that the master called her Xiu. He addressed her by name and asked how long she had been following him. Xiu blushed and was delighted and said that since he treated her wounds, she would not confuse the master's smell with anyone. And a Y realized that he had felt her gaze all this time. He remembered the mountain of black ginseng and asked if she had brought it, and the pleased Xiu said that it was her because she wanted to help the master. A Y said that she helped him a lot and patted her on the head, which made the girl very embarrassed. He thought that it was she who was following him and that, judging by her behavior, she was very close to the previous owner of this body. He continued to stroke her and thought that he needed to understand how the old owner behaved with this girl before, since he did not want her to begin to suspect him of something. Xiu sighed and said that having changed his appearance, the master became very gentle towards her, but she also loves the former fierce master. Jian Wujin and Xiao Shuai approached a Y and Jian Wujin asked the master if he was okay, and added that he was very scared for him. The old man, who watched all this, said that the guy need not worry, since his master was in perfect order. He added that the guy hid his spiritual energy so well that the old man no longer believed that he could resist the Soul Eater technique. The old man frowned and thought that for a moment it was here that the aura of a holy war stage master flashed, and that when he saw the girl grab the child, he thought that she was simply mocking the weak. However, he forgot that there are no weak opponents in this tournament, since even when this master's student was captured, the master was in no hurry to show strength and kept everything under control. The old man was delighted that a Y's face showed no fear even when the technique was used on him. He was sure that such a person would suit his Yuden sect, and smiled, because the ideal candidate stood in front of him, and he could not help but bring him to the sect. The old man smiled mysteriously and asked the master what his name was. A Y wondered irritably who this old man was and why he looked more like a villain than himself. Xiu asked the master if she wanted her to deal with the old man, and the guy asked if she knew the old man. Xiu frowned and said that she knew him, but he was not yet old enough to know her. She said that this is the 3rd elder of the Yuden sect, and the tramps call him the god of drunkenness. A Y asked if this sect was one of the 3 great sects, to which the girl replied that it was indeed so and that in the past the master disliked this sect because they were too poor and their disciples led a wandering lifestyle. So I didn't even include in the list those to whom the master declared war. He was surprised that this sect was not included in the list, and that he had been so short-sighted before. Xiu continued to explain that because of this, the other sects thought that this sect was conspiring with their demonic sect, and almost declared war on them themselves. If the Yuden sect didn't have the 3 elders of the War King stage, the sects themselves would have killed each other. The guy noticed that the story was too complicated, and the girl continued to say that their sect was the strongest, so even if the 3 sects united, they would not be able to defeat them. She beamed with joy and was sure that despite the fact that their sect was in decline, with the return of the head, everything would be as before. The old man frowned at the guy and the girl and did not understand what they were talking about. He attracted attention and said that he had asked a question, and that he was wondering where this young man was from and what sect he was from, if any. The guy introduced himself as Li Tzu Wai and thanked the old man for his help, saying that he did not know how to contact him. The man said that his young student called him grandfather and that the guy could call him the same, to which a Y said that he could not call him that. Xiu was shocked and cried, because the master had never spoken to anyone in person before. She did not understand what happened to the master in her absence. Jian Wujin called out to the girl and she turned around. He asked confusedly what her name was and how she knew his master. Zhu looked at him irritably and turned away, thinking that if she were next to the master, then he would not have to deal with these people. She decided that the master did not have enough warriors. Zhu became embarrassed and hugged herself, thinking that she was ready to make wonderful warriors for the master herself. Because she had a beautiful and healthy body, so her and the master's children would be very strong martial artists. The old man decided to ask who the girl next to Awai was and pointed to Zhu. The old man frowned and thought that although this girl does not hide her strength, her aura is very strange. Awai stood in front of the girl and said that this was his cousin, whom he had not seen for many years, so he was very lucky to meet her at the tournament. And Zhu was very embarrassed by these words. The guy added that she is very shy and does not like to talk to strangers. The old man now realized that they knew each other and said that this tournament was organized by the three great sects so that masters from all over Jiang who would gather in one place and exchange experiences. Awai's disciples listened to the words of the old man, who continued to say that the true purpose of the tournament was to attract new sect members, and that he and his disciples liked him, so he would like to invite them to his sect. Awai said that they were not interested in this invitation, which shocked Jian Wujin, because this sect is one of the great ones. The next day, in the red carriage, someone asked in surprise how one could refuse the invitation of the third elder of the Yuden sect. Awai was eating green cookies and replied that for some reason the elder insisted that he and his disciples join them. Sitting with him in the cart was Meng Jianqiu, who did not understand how he could refuse, and Awai said that he was simply not interested, since he wanted to become the founder of a sect and not a disciple of some sect, because he did not want to obey someone's rules. Meng Jianqiu was surprised by the guy's logic, but thought that perhaps there was some truth in his words, because people know her as the saint of Wangwu Palace, but hardly anyone will remember her real name. This guy doesn't seem reasonable to her, but he exudes ease and freedom. The guy ate the cookies contentedly, and then grinned, thinking that what had happened would be an excellent headline for the news, attracting attention. He decided to take this opportunity to become more popular, because no one would suspect him of being the former lord of the demonic sect. He thought that he needed to come up with a name for his sect, since it would be stupid to be called the second version of the demonic sect. He decided to discuss this with Zhu later. Meanwhile, the carts reached a yard and the driver said that they were there. The courtyard turned out to be the Awai Hotel, and he jumped off the cart and thanked the holy lady for taking him there. He invited her to go to the hotel and have tea, and the girl was surprised that he even had a hotel. Fireworks began to explode in the sky, and Awai saw that a girl in white clothes and red hair, surrounded by servants, came out to meet him. The servants shouted in unison that they congratulated the master on his victory, and that the master was an incomparable champion. The girl walked up to Awai and asked where the young master was, as she wanted to tell him something. The guy pointed to the back of the cart and said that her young master was there. Ziyuyu and her father walked up behind the guy and greeted him. Ziyuyu's father took the guy by the hand and joyfully said that he was very glad to see him after a long absence. The man said that although the results are not yet known, he is sure that Awai took first place, so he waited for him since the morning to congratulate him first. The man was so happy that Ziyuyu asked him to be calm. Meng Jianqiu was surprised to see Zia, who was Ziyuyu's father. She was shocked and did not understand whether this was the same powerful master that Ziyuyu was talking about. Ziyuyu approached Meng Jianqiu and asked why she was here, and the surprised Meng Jianqiu said that she should have asked, and was surprised what they were all doing here together and how they knew each other. Ziyuyu said that this is the same guy she told the girl about and introduced Awai. The girl did not understand why she needed his name and, surprised, asked to tell why Zia, known for his nobility and restraint, behaves this way around this guy. She pointed to the man who wanted to hug Awai and said how much he missed him, and Awai thanked Zia for meeting him. The man turned to Meng Jianqiu and said that although she is a saint of the court, she must understand that Jiang who respects the strength of the master. Even Awai addressed him as his elder the first time she met him, so she shouldn't interact with the guy in such a disrespectful manner. Meng Jianqiu was embarrassed and said that Zia was much older than Awai and did not think it was appropriate for him to communicate with this young man like that. To which the man replied that the teacher is someone from whom you can learn something, so he would like to call Awai his father if the guy didn't mind. The man broke into a happy smile and said that without the generosity of this master, he would never have been able to break through to the next level. He remembered the scroll that Awai gave him and said that Awai was a real deity for him. Meng Jianqiu looked at him in surprise and was silent, and then pushed Ziyuyu in the side and said that she thought that something wrong was going on with her father. Ziyuyu replied that her father was just a little overexcited. Meng Jianqiu was surprised, not thinking it was a little overexcitement, and asked if it was true that her father had broken through to the next level thanks to a Y. Xie Yu asked if the girl remembered the main drawback of the 9 Ben's heart defense technique. The girl replied that this technique is very powerful among defensive ones, but its disadvantage is that it does not allow one to attack the enemy. She added that she knows that Xia has long been looking for an offensive technique that could be combined with his defensive technique, but it is almost impossible because there are very few compatible techniques in the world, especially such powerful ones. She put her hand in front of her and violet energy began to appear from it. Xia approached Y and asked him to look at the performance of his updated technique to tell him what he was missing. The sun shone on the 2-story Chinese building behind the trees. Meng Jianqiu sat down and covered her head with her hands, not believing that everything turned out exactly like this, because she could not imagine that this guy would turn out to be the same suspicious master that Xie Yu was talking about. The girl thought that she could guess, because Xie Yu mentioned that a small child always goes with the young man. Xie Yu watched her and said that Y was only trying to hide his strength, but in fact he was an incredibly powerful master, and that if they persuaded him to join the Iron Gate sect, their sect would become strong again. Meng Jianqiu was shocked, thinking that this youth had brainwashed Xie Yu and her father. She looked at Y who was talking to Xia and thought that such a young guy could not be a strong master. She thought about Xia being a holy war stage master, and didn't understand why he needed advice from some suspicious guy. The girl remembered that she had given Y the Wangu Palace whistle, and wondered if the guy would give it back to her. Xia put his hand in front of his face and screamed, activating the technique, and his body glowed. He put his hand forward and summoned a golden lotus, while golden swords glowed above his head. Meng Jianqiu closed her eyes and was surprised to see Xia standing on the golden lotus with a huge golden hand behind her back and swords. The golden hand hit the ground and disappeared, leaving a trail on the ground. The technique dissipated and Xia asked Y what he thought about his new technique. He added that his technique was weaker than that of his young student, but this was only because he had just begun to master it. The man noticed that Y frowned and became embarrassed, not understanding why. He got scared and began to study his face, noticing how the guy's forehead wrinkled, his eyebrows frowned and his lips tensed. He decided that apparently everything was so bad, since Y still hadn't said anything. The guy was afraid that the man was able to master this technique even with an incomplete description, since this is his future enemy. This situation is dangerous. He wondered what if he acted as the complete opposite of the previous owner. Body, then no one will begin to suspect him. The guy grinned and thought that this was true, because the previous owner was a powerful and cruel master of the demonic sect, and he was just a harmless guy. Plus, he would need money to start a sect, so he would still have to share the technology to attract sponsors and followers. Meng Jianqiu couldn't believe that this was possible. She looked at the trail of equipment on the ground and the upset Xia, and then turned to his daughter and thought that she was telling the truth. In the purple hall of the palace, a girl in a purple dress and white hair was sitting on a sofa, and Meng Jianqiu was sitting on her knees in front of her. The girl turned to Meng Jianqiu and said that she had done a good job, and that maybe after this the emperor would calm down for a while. She held black ginseng root in her hands and said that she was afraid to imagine how many people had to empty their treasures to get so much black ginseng. Meng Jianqiu answered her mistress that all this black ginseng was brought by one person. The lady asked her again, and the girl confirmed her words, saying that she thought that this man had come to establish ties with the Wangu Palace, but he did not ask for anything other than 3 official places in the tournament. The lady listened carefully to Meng Jianqiu, and she continued and said that after the tournament ended, she took him back to Yuehang and found that there was clearly something wrong with this guy, because even Xia, the Holy War Stage Master, treated him very highly respectfully. She then learned that thanks to this young man, Xia was able to perfect his 9-bend heart defense technique. She looked at the floor and added that since he could find a technique that was perfect for him to combine, then she could too. The mistress interrupted her and refused, which surprised the girl. The lady asked her if she had forgotten who she was and looked at Meng Jianqiu with disdain. She said that people who raise poisonous creatures cannot practice martial arts. The lady added that the beings inside the girl would not allow her to start cultivating so easily. She also reminded Meng Jianqiu that she was a saint of Wangu Palace, so she had no right to start a friendship with someone outside her. Meng Jianqiu was upset and said that senior sister Yui was able to awaken her cultivation, and was able to ascend to the War King stage. The girl added that Yui not only can practice martial arts, but also goes around with handsome men, and asked why she couldn't get close to someone who seemed special to her. Her mistress screamed and became angry, saying that these words were too impudent. She looked at the girl angrily and said that although she began to praise her more often, this did not mean that she could contradict her. The lady added that Yui is special and that Meng Jiankyu will never compare to her. She added that Yui took part in the tournament this time, but someone in the second stage of the tournament could turn the Soul Eater technique against her, and since then Yui has not regained consciousness. The lady pointed at Meng Jiankyu and asked if she was the one in charge of arena number and the tournament. Meng Jiankyu was scared and looked down when the lady told her to find the person who dared to do this to a Wangu Palace student. The lady clenched her fist, which shone with purple energy, and frowned, saying that as soon as the girl found this man, she would personally kill him. During the day, people walked around the city, and one of the men told another that the winner of the sword tournament this year was one of the masters of their city, Yui Hang. The second man answered him in surprise that in their city there were only poor people. How could there be masters here? The third man told him that although their city was small, it was full of important people. The people looked back at him, and he added that Master Zia from the Iron Gate sect had arrived to check on them, but had not yet left the city. A passing grandmother joined him and said that in recent days the city has become more lively, because even her shop began to bring in more money. Someone apologized and interrupted their conversation. A bald man with large beads clasped his hands in front of him and sheepishly asked if there was a place in their city where he could stay for a while. Next to him stood a bald child who looked around with a smile. The grandmother said that there are now many guests in the city and all the places in the local hotel are occupied, but there are still places in the new hotel. But the owner recently changed and renovations are still underway. The little bald boy turned to the man who was with him and called him brother. He pointed to a man who was holding a stick with red balls in his hands and said that he wanted to try it. The bald man was upset and said that they would have to save money since the master gave them little money for the journey. He took 2 coins out of his wallet and became upset. The little boy took those coins and bought those red balls on a stick from the seller, and the man got upset and thought he wanted to go home. He thought that he was originally sent to the tournament to show the kid the world and greet the elders of the 3 great sects, but he was so tired that he was ready to spend the night even under a tree. He noticed something and saw a little boy in a hat passing a basket of fruit to his grandmother and saying that he had brought her fruit and that she could bring everything to the hotel. The grandmother patted him on the head and asked how the renovations were going and when they were opening, and the boy said that the hotel would open tomorrow. Grandmother replied that then she would definitely come to them. She pointed to the travelers and said that these monks were just looking for a place where they could stay. A man hung up a red sign and someone told him to move it a little to the left, then to the right and a little lower. Meng Jianku said that this is just right and can be secured. Awai looked at her and apologized for disturbing the holy lady herself over such a trifle. The girl asked him why he woke up so late, because the hour of the snake had already arrived. The guy yawned and said that he had been working too much lately, so now that he had some free time, he decided to sleep off, and that if it weren't for the preparations for the opening, he would have slept until the night. He reminded the girl that after the tournament she wanted to return to her normal life, and asked why she stayed in Yuehang City. She turned away, frowned and said that she had the right to be where she wanted. The girl thought about the fact that she rarely has the opportunity to be in the outside world, so she is not going to return soon. Meng Jianqiu turned to Awai and asked if he had seen suspicious people at the tournament in the arena number. The guy got scared and repeated the words about suspicious people. He said that all the participants in the arena seemed too dubious to him, and then wondered why she asked this, hoping that she did not have time to find out Zhu's true identity. The girl carefully studied Awai, and continued to think that Meng Jianqiu could not have guessed, because she had not even seen Zhu. At this point, he began to seem like the most suspicious guy in the arena. She sighed and said that most of the participants didn't know each other, so it wasn't surprising that he was suspicious of everyone. Meng Jianqiu asked him if he had met a girl there who could shape her spiritual energy into the shape of red vines. She added that she was accompanied by 2 handsome guys, so it is difficult to confuse her with anyone. Awai got scared and started remembering moments with this girl from the tournament, and then thought that he thought this girl was an ordinary minor character who would disappear after the main scene. His face contorted in horror, and then he embarrassedly asked who this girl was. Meng Jianqiu frowned and said that this girl is a disciple of Wangu Palace, and during the tournament she was seriously injured and has not yet woken up. She added that her mistress values her very much, so she was furious about what happened and ordered Meng Jianqiu to find whoever did it. But everyone involved had already left, so he was the only one she could ask about it. Awai became even more frightened and said that now he understood everything. He was shocked and wondered if he had done anything that could have caused this girl to be seriously injured. But on the other hand, he could unknowingly harm the girl if the power of his inner Zhai is so strong. Their dialogue was interrupted by Xiao Shuai, who came along with the monks and told his master that he had brought guests. The little boy monk pointed at Awai and said that he recognized him because he had brought the child to the sword tournament. Awai did not recognize them, but said that he did not expect to meet them here. Awai pointed to the door of the inn and said that since they had guests, it would be better to talk inside, and invited the holy lady to enter. The interior of the hotel sparkled after renovation. There were beautiful vases on the table, and the wall was decorated with gold carvings. Meng Jianqiu thought that she had never been to a hotel, and this one was quite rich in decoration, so she understood where the guy got so much black ginseng. She looked at Awai and thought that he was not at all interested in the great sects, and he selflessly helped Master Xia move to the next level. But she didn't understand why he was trying to appease Wangu Palace. The guy looked at her and said that she and the monks were the first guests after the renovation. The girl embarrassedly said that this hotel used to be called differently, and she was wondering why he decided to change the name. Then she thought that at first she thought that he was trying to flatter her, but now it seemed to her that she was doing it. Their conversation was interrupted by a monk who said that in his sect all hermits live in isolation from the rest of the world, since only in the middle of nature can they enter a state of solitude. However, even they sometimes have to leave these places and face the turbulence of human life, so peace is all they want at such moments. The monk imagined himself in nature around the trees and smiled. Imagining himself and Awai on the edge of a cliff in the forest, he thought that in such a bustling world, where powerful masters rule, every traveler hopes to find a corner of his peace and tranquility, so the new name just personifies the ideal of every traveler in the world. He realized the meaning behind the name and looked at Awai. The monk began to cry and said that this name was wonderful, and that he had been looking for this place for a long time. The guy burst into tears and was surprised that the monk also thought so. He was glad that someone could understand what he meant by the meaning of the name, and took the monk by the shoulders, feeling that he was kindred spirits with him. Last night the hotel building was illuminated by moonlight. Inside the inn, Awai called Zhu over and said that he could not use his powers due to the poison he was poisoned with during the last battle. But now he had managed to establish good relations with the Iron Gate sect and meet the saint of Wangu Palace. Therefore, now they cannot rush to revive the demonic sect. Zhu said that she understands and is ready to serve her master. The guy said that there was no one else here except the two of them, so he wanted to talk to her about something. She was embarrassed that the master wanted to talk to her alone about something. Blushing, she imagined herself without clothes and thought that the master wanted to offer her the same thing. Awai took the blushing girl by the shoulders, who was already ready for anything, and asked if she liked the name Peaceful Hotel. Zhu was confused and looked at him blankly. Returning to the present moment, Awai and the monk held hands, calling each other friend and benefactor. Meng Jianqiu looked at them thoughtfully and tried to understand what hidden meaning was contained in the new name. Awai grinned and thought that one movie said that the more you hide, the easier it is to find you, so no one would think that the demonic sect lord would open a peaceful inn. The monk asked if the owner would allow him to stay at this hotel, and the guy replied that he could just be called the owner of Li. He asked Xiao Shuai to escort the guests to their room. The boy accepted the instructions, and the monk thanked Awai. The little boy who came with the monk saw the large bed in the room and was surprised at the new furniture. The monk immediately lay down on the bed and smiled. He was glad that he was finally lying down on a soft bed. The boy climbed on him and said that his older brother shouldn't sleep now, and the man replied that he shouldn't disturb people when they fall asleep. The boy got upset and said that he didn't mean it. He explained that Master Zhu Kung had said that great fortune awaited them in this city, so if they did not go out into the city, they would not be able to meet their fate. The monk turned away and said that the boy did not think about fate when he was wandering around, but as soon as they checked into the hotel, he remembered. He added that they had not left the city, so there were chances, and that maybe they would meet their fate after a long sleep. The boy pulled his brother's clothes and shouted that fate was not so merciful, and luck could disappear if they hesitated, so they needed to take a walk, and the brother replied that he would just sleep. The boy heard a knock on the door and turned around, and his older brother asked who it was there. The boy brought a basket and said that the servants brought them a basket of fruit in honor of the opening of the hotel. The tired monk told the younger brother not to forget to thank the servants, and allowed him to eat first, as long as his brother would let him sleep. He thought that the master only said that they needed to visit this city, but did not specify anything about great luck. He covered himself with a blanket and thought that he should first sleep well, and then come up with something. When suddenly the boy screamed, attracting the attention of his older brother. The upset man got up from the bed and asked what he wanted. The boy pointed at something in shock, and then picked up the fruit basket and was even more surprised. The basket contained green fruits covered with leaves. The monk was shocked, and then he picked up the basket and, almost crying, thought that this was great luck. Meanwhile, in the courtyard in front of the hotel, Awai met the townspeople. His grandmother told him that after the renovation, his hotel looked just like a palace and that there was no other hotel like it in the entire Central Plain. She took out a flower decoration and said that his student asked her to bring something made of flowers so that he could decorate the entrance. He presented the portrait, decorated with flowers used at funerals, and thanked the woman, saying that it reminded him of something. She patted him on the back and said that she would come tomorrow to watch the opening and support him. She added that it hurt her to watch him being bullied, but he was now very respected in the city. She was glad that being the owner of the inn, he would easily be able to look after his young student, whom she herself had looked after before. He asked if she meant little Zio Shuai, and Grandma said that she would talk to him next time since she had a lot of work to do. The guy asked to bring more friends tomorrow. Wai handed her a basket of fruits and asked her to take them and said that they grew them in their garden. She thanked him and someone shouted, asking him to wait. The monk ran to Awai and thought that these fruits were the holy fruits that were stolen 2 years ago. He frowned, not expecting that this was the same fate that the master was talking about, and could not understand why the fruits ended up here. He stood in front of Awai and the old woman and apologized before pulling off the cloth that was covering the fruit in the basket. The basket contained the same fruits that the servants delivered to his room. The monk was confused and asked where the gentleman got these fruits, and the guy replied that they grew these sugar apples themselves. The monk was shocked that they were able to grow these fruits. The monk looked at something in surprise. Trees with fruits that he received at the inn appeared in front of him, and Awai stood behind him. He could not believe that these were actually planted holy fruits. He looked at the trees in shock and could not believe that there were so many of them. Awai cut off one of the fruits and said that they were collected by his student, who liked them so much that they decided to plant several. The guy turned to the monk and was surprised to see that he was crying. He said that their master always said that these fruits were very valuable, and remembered that their temple's holy fruit tree was very small and had not produced fruit for over 10 years. 2 years ago, several fruits did grow, but someone stole them too. He remembered how his master tried to stop a thief who stole the fruit. The monk looked again at the trees in Awai's garden and could not believe that he would ever see something like this. He thought that these trees emanated nobility, and that if you looked at them for too long, you could go blind. Confused, Awai handed the monk a fruit and told him not to cry, and then suggested that he take a few pieces with him, which would help advertise the hotel. The monk said that he did not understand why his holy fruit trees were so fruitful, and that there was such a tree in his temple. But it was not at all like these. Awai asked the monk where their temple was and what the climate was like, and he replied that their temple was on top of Ling Mountain, where the climate was always spring. The guy said that this was the problem, since the sugar apple is a tropical fruit that will not grow well in such conditions. He recalled that he had gone to great lengths to recreate such a climate in the garden. In addition, the soil that Zhu brought helps the trees grow faster. He told the monk that trees will not grow faster just because they really want to, so first you need to prepare the ideal conditions for the tree. The monk was confused because he did not understand what a tropical fruit was and what kind of sugar apples he was talking about. He thought that each plant has certain conditions that are suitable only for it. He looked at Awai, and then at the fruit, and thought that it seemed to him that they were taking perfect care of the tree. But it turns out they were not giving it what it needed. He cried and realization came to him. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the hotel, a man in a golden robe asked why the hotel was still closed, because it looked good. This man was Lu Renzia from the Lingjian sect, and behind him stood a girl wearing a pink dress and pink hair. The girl frowned and said that since this was a hotel, it should always be open. She couldn't understand why they were making her wait so long. Jian Wujin waved his fan and bowed, asking the guests if they would like to stay at this inn. He apologized and said that the hotel would not open until tomorrow. The girl said that the owner had finally shown up, because she had already thought that the hotel was owned by some dead man. She was unhappy that he made them wait so long. She said he was a terrible hotelier and didn't understand who he thought he was. Jian Wujin grinned, and then raised his fan above his head, thinking that he was no longer the same as he was before, because he rose in the rankings after his master won the tournament, and said that he was 27 on the list of killers. He got angry and started shouting that the girl was looking for a fight and that she should first ask who he was. He didn't understand how she dared to call his master's hotel terrible. He pointed his fan at her and said that the hotel would not open until tomorrow. The girl got angry and drew her sword, ready to attack. Lu Renzia put his hand in front of her and said that she shouldn't be so rude. He asked the guy if he was the owner of the inn and introduced himself as the first disciple of the Lingjian sect. He said that there were no rooms left in other hotels, and since they were going to open tomorrow, they could make an exception for them and admit them early. Jian Wujin said that he liked this kind of communication better, but they understood everything wrong, since the owner of this inn is his master. He pointed at the girl and added that Sister Lu Renzia had already expressed her dissatisfaction with this hotel, so such a terrible hotel would not really be suitable for such high-ranking people from the Lingjian sect. The girl got angry and pointed her sword at him, saying that he was provoking her. Her brother told her to calm down and replied that his sister was very tired and didn't think what she was saying, but she didn't really mean it. He smiled and asked Jian Wujin to take him to the owner as he wanted to talk to him personally. Jian Wujin got angry and said that his master was busy and talking with his guests, so he dare not distract him because of such trifles. He added that he had already said that the hotel would only open tomorrow for everyone, regardless of rank. Lu Renzia was surprised that the guy didn't react when he heard his name, not understanding who owned this hotel. The girl got angry and screamed that this guy didn't respect them at all. She swung her sword and said that she would personally teach him a lesson. She ran towards Jian Wujin, and her brother looked at her silently, which confused the girl, because she was just pretending to be angry and waiting for her brother to stop her. Lu Renzia still asked her to behave more reservedly, and thought that now he was interested in knowing who owned this hotel. Suddenly there was an explosion at the edge of the city, and Xia, his daughter, and Meng Jianqiu, who were drinking tea, turned around and asked what happened there. Meng Jianqiu stood up and said that it seemed that this sound came from the direction of the Awai Hotel, which Xia also understood, who was very scared because of this. Meanwhile, in the sugar apple garden, Awai continued to tell the monk how to care for the sugar apples. He talked about the required temperature, soil, and humidity level that can be maintained with the help of the formation, when suddenly he heard a loud sound. He looked towards the sound and said that the city was too busy today, and then thought that he had been in this world for quite a long time and that thanks to his perfect plan, everything was going well. He smiled and thought that very soon his hotel would become the most famous in the world. Xie Yu ran out of the hotel and called Awai. She was very scared and said that something had happened near his hotel. Meanwhile, a fire was burning in front of the hotel entrance. Lu Renzia held his sister in his arms and was scared, because despite his sister's character, she was one of the most skilled among the students of her age, so the one who brushed off her attack must be very strong. Jian Wujin stood in the clouds of smoke and fire, covering himself with a fan, and Lu Renzia was shocked to see a child in front of him who was protecting him with his technique. The smoke flowed around Jian Wujin and Xiao Shuai, and the ground cracked in front of them. The girl stood up, frowned and coughed, while her brother looked at her. She screamed that she didn't know where this boy came from, but her attack was repulsed by some treasure he was carrying. She jumped and swung her sword, saying that she wouldn't be able to defend herself like that again. Her brother stood in front of her and asked her to leave it to him, saying that since they were both martial artists, he wanted to know which of them was stronger. But if he defeats the boy, they will be allowed to stay at the hotel. He took out his sword and charged it with energy. He looked at the boy and thought that it was he who blocked the attack, although there was no fluctuation in spiritual power at that moment, so he was indeed protected by some kind of treasure. He jumped and thrust his sword forward in front of Xiao Shuai, deciding that he had an obligation to defeat these guys since he was the first disciple of the Lingjian sect, and if he did not win, he would lose all his status. He smirked and decided that these guys would pay for insulting his sect. Lu Renzia shouted for the boy to try to block it and punched him, and Xiao Shuai used a technique and punched Lu Renzia, punching him right in the face. The boy knocked him back and Lu Renzia fell on his back right in front of his sister. His sister was angry that the boy dared to hit her brother right in the face and, taking the sword, ran towards Xiao Shuai. Green lightning began to surround her, and she thought that this boy only knew how to fight, so he was probably weak in defense. She almost struck him, and Xiao Shuai again stood up to use the technique. The girl moved behind him and decided that now the boy had been caught. She grinned and thought it was a victory. She flew at him from above, pointing the end of the sword at Xiao Shuai's head. The sign with the name of the hotel almost fell off the wall. Master Xia and Meng Jianqiu stood in shock and did not understand what was happening. Xia looked back and saw a girl falling to the ground along with her sword and saying that it was impossible. She was scared, not realizing how many techniques this boy knew, because her master said that martial artists can only master one technique in their entire lives. Awai and Xia Yu looked up to Xia and Awai and asked if the problem had been resolved. The guy asked to tell him what happened here, and Jian Wujin, crying and holding Xiao Shuai in his arms, ran up to him and said that he survived only thanks to Xiao Shuai. Lu Renzia was very scared and lay on the ground pretending to be dead, not believing that this guy was a master. Jian Wujin began to say that a girl approached the hotel and started screaming. He tried to calm her down, but she almost stabbed him with a sword. Xia added that when he arrived, everything was already over. Lu Renzia was scared, because if that boy was this master's disciple, then this master must be extremely strong. He decided to run away while no one was paying attention to him. The girl called her brother and everyone turned to her, and she sat on the ground and watched as her brother flew away on a sword and told her to wait for him here until he brought help. She looked up at the sky in frustration, and then was heartbroken because her brother could have taken her with him. But for some reason he ran away alone. Awai watched Lu Renzia fly into the sky and was surprised at how quickly he escaped. Meng Jianqiu asked the innkeeper why he didn't stop the guy and whether Awai was afraid that the guy would come back with help. She added that, most likely, he would be in trouble if nothing was done. He waved his hand and said that it was an ordinary passerby who had already run away. The guy thought that troubles only come to those who think about them, which is why the main characters of books always suffer. He smiled evilly and pointed at the girl in the pink dress, saying that they also had a hostage, which scared the girl. She was surprised, wondering if this guy knew who her older brother was. Jian Wujin joyfully shouted that his master could kill a War King stage master with just one move, so they didn't care about their sect, because the master could kill anyone who wanted to harm them. Meng Jianqiu frowned and asked if he was exaggerating, and Xia Yu told her that this was not an exaggeration, since she had seen with her own eyes how Awai destroyed an entire house with one finger because there was not enough space in it. Xia frowned and said that if these people are really from the Lingjian sect, then they are really in trouble. Meanwhile, in the hall of some palace, flooded with sunlight, stood a man with white hair, to his left stood a girl in black clothes, and to his right sat a man and another girl stood next to him. Some guy ran towards them and called his head. He shouted that something was wrong and was scared. He was hit by a blue beam of energy and the guy fell. The man with white hair was very angry and called the servant Mao Zhao, and his fist glowed blue. The girl in black looked at the fallen servant. The man turned around and told the servant that no one was allowed to distract him when he was communicating with the sect leaders. This man is the head of the Lingjian sect and his name is Lu Rene. The girl in black, who is the master of the moon reflection tower named Yu Mayan, said that the head of Lu Rene has entered the stage of the Saint of War as his aura has become even more formidable. She added that there was no need to be angry with this guy, because he just wanted to deliver important news as quickly as possible. A man in a green robe was sitting on a chair, and behind him stood a girl in a white dress. This man was the master of the Green Mountain Tower named Gongzi King. He said that they were in no hurry so they could take a break. Lu Rene asked Mao Zhao to report what happened. Mao Zhao sat on the floor, his face grimacing in pain, and he said that brother Lu Rene had returned. Yu Mayan thought for a moment and asked if this servant meant a brother named Lu Renzia, adding that this was most likely the clan head's favorite disciple. Lu Rene explained that some time ago, his brother and his younger sister left the clan's domain to gain experience. So he must have achieved some success since he has already returned. He asked to bring Lu Renzia to greet the respected sect heads. The servant was scared and said that Lu Renzia would not be able to come. The head of the clan got angry and shouted that he really needed to bring his brother himself. The girl in the white dress said that Lu Rene should not be angry, because perhaps his brother had prepared some kind of surprise for him, because her son likes to do the same. Gongzi King hugged the girl, which confused her, and said that they could come to him themselves. Lu Renzia cried and called for the master while lying on the ground, while Lu Rene and the other clan heads looked at him. Yu Mayan looked at the guy in shock, asking when he managed to change so much, because they had not seen each other for only a couple of months. Lu Rene grabbed the student by the shoulders and angrily began to ask what happened and where his sister was. Lu Renzia cried and said that they reached Yueheng and started looking for a hotel for the night. He spoke politely to the hotel employee, but he decided to suddenly attack and almost killed him. The guy fell to the ground again and added that he ran away when the hotel workers lost their vigilance. But the younger sister did not have time. The girl in the white dress thought about it when she heard about Yueheng City. Meanwhile, the sun shone on the Awai Hotel as workers cleaned the courtyard and put up flower decorations. Awai thanked Xia because he brought assistance, without whom they would not have had time to restore order. However, the guy thought that these flower wreaths were unnecessary here. Xia said that this help was not worth thanking, and that he was ashamed that he could not help with something more. Xia thought that Awai liked the flower crowns and decided to give him more next time. The man said that although his sect is one of the most powerful, even they cannot interfere in the struggle of other sects. He added that the Lingjian sect should not be underestimated, even if they have few followers. He asked Why if he knew why the three great sects united with the Imperial Palace and established the Sword Path tournament. The guy replied that this was necessary to find capable people. Zia said that this was true because it helps to strengthen power, and that the demonic sect lord used to kill a huge number of martial artists and destroy many sects. Some sects began to unite, while some simply disappeared, and some sects began to take over weaker sects. He explained that in their world, only strength is respected, so such an outcome is obvious, and that the Lingjian sect increased its power precisely by capturing other sects. He remembered all three heads of this sect. The next day was the opening of the hotel. People were walking at the entrance to the hotel and discussing what happened here yesterday. Some girl was happily running around, and some woman asked her not to run away. Yumayan looked down at the hotel, asking if this was the peaceful hotel they were talking about. Lu Reni said that this is a pitiful place and they shouldn't have brought so many people. He stood in the portal, and behind him stood the other heads of the clan and a girl in a white dress. Yumayan said that this place should not be underestimated. She pointed to the flower crowns and said that in their sect, they only use such crowns as a form of tribute to the departed. She assumed that the owner of the inn knew that they would return and deliberately placed them here. Humayun added that the word holiday is even specially written on the wreaths to mock them. Lu Reni ordered a crowd of disciples to grab everyone in the inn and bring the innkeeper to him. The girl in the white dress looked upset at the hotel, wanting to say something about it. Gongzi King hugged the girl, asking what she was thinking about and whether she was from this city. He came close to her ear and invited her to look into her house when they were done with business, since he had heard that her sister lived here, and she was most likely as beautiful as this girl. The girl was embarrassed and wanted to refuse, but Gongzi King took her by the waist and got angry, asking if she was trying to contradict him. The girl was embarrassed and said that it would be a great honor for her if the Tower Master would visit her home. He called her a good girl and said that Yuihang is now his hometown, so he will bring her to this city as often as she wants. The girl clearly didn't like it and she lowered her gaze in embarrassment, thanking the master. She looked at the hotel, thinking that this was the first hotel, but if the name and style had changed, then the owner was now different. She got scared thinking what happened to her sister. Little sister Lu Renzia slammed her fists on the table, shouting how dare they lock her up. She walked around the room saying that soon her brother would bring help and then they would take revenge. A Y peeked around the corner, holding a tray of food, and said that she was the one who looked like a villain right now, threatening them. The girl got scared and tensed. He entered the room and said that she had originally wanted to stay at the hotel herself, so she should be happy that she was allowed inside. The guy put a tray of food on the table and told the girl to eat, otherwise she would die of hunger. She was scared and did not understand why he decided to feed her, because he heard what she said. A Y pointed to the dish and said that he prepared it himself and asked if she wanted to eat. He smirked and thought that treating prisoners well was a sign of a kind soul, and that it was ironic that even villains could be kind. The girl was even more frightened when she saw the guy's face and thought that he must have added some kind of poison to the food, since with such a grin one cannot wish for good. She decided that he wanted the girl to choose between death from hunger or from poison, when suddenly her stomach growled from hunger. She frighteningly took the chopsticks and the plate, deciding that she would die anyway if she didn't eat. She began to eat, thinking that it would be better to die well fed, when suddenly she dropped the plate and leaned on the table. She raised her head and saw that there was a clear blue sky above her. She was surprised that poisons could be so tasty and thought that she was already in heaven. The girl began to cry, deciding that this poison was acting too quickly. Suddenly she heard that someone asked the head of Lu Reni if this was the same student who was kidnapped. She was surprised that she hadn't died yet, and then she shouted joyfully, turning to her master. Lu Reni looked at her with a grin, while the other clan heads and a girl in a white dress hovered next to him. A Y looked at them, surprised that they appeared too quickly. He was upset that he would have to hire workers again to renovate the hotel because the ceiling was destroyed. Lu Reni asked him if he was the owner of this hotel. Lu Reni frowned and thought that the innkeeper really had no spiritual power, and his fist was already charged with blue energy. He pointed his palm at a Y and a blue glow came out of it. Lu Reni said that a Y seriously injured a disciple of the head of Lingjian, and also grabbed one of the female students. He ordered her to be returned and then he would think about saving his life. A Y sighed and said that another stranger showed up and began to demand something. The girl in the pink dress was surprised and frightened, thinking that all the masters of these lands should know her master. She looked at a Y grinning and thought that he had planned everything in advance, knowing full well who they were. The girl thought that, Judging by the guy's words, this was not the first time he had done something like this. She looked at him again, deciding that his appearance was just a disguise and she had no idea who he really was. Lu Renee got angry, asking if a Y was refusing, and then hit him with the technique, telling him not to complain later. The energy of the technique was about to hit a Y, but the girl screamed, asking her to stop. She said that this guy knew about them in the first place, so it's a trap. Lu Renee was scared and surprised, but realized that he could no longer stop the technique. The beam of blue energy was about to hit the ground, and Xia Yuyu screamed for everyone to leave and covered the little girl with herself, and a frightened Meng Jianqiu stood next to her. Meng Jianqiu ran towards Xia Yuyu and told her to be careful. Xia Yuyu turned around and saw a magic beam flying straight at her, but suddenly Xiu stood in front of her and stopped the attack with her sword. Xia Yuyu pressed herself to the ground, hugging the little girl, and then looked at Xiu's face. She was surprised by the arrival of this girl. Just before this, Xiu stood wearing a black mask and asked her master if this would definitely work. Y told her that she could trust him since he was a professional in this matter. He told her that if you wear a mask, then no one will ever recognize you. Meanwhile, when the Lingjian sect attacked the hotel, Zhu was protecting Xia Yuyu. Y walked out into the courtyard in front of the hotel with his disciples, Zhu, Xia Yuyu and Meng Jianqiu, while Lu Renee looked at them. Y said that they not only destroyed the hotel, but also attacked Iron Gate sect members and civilians. He looked scared and said that he didn't expect the followers of the Lingjian sect to be so creepy. Meng Jianqiu ran up to Xia Yuyu and asked if she and Y were injured. Lu Renee looked at the girls with displeasure and thought that one of them was dressed as a member of the Wangu Palace, and the second was from the untouchable Iron Gate sect. He hoped that everything would not be so complicated and that he would quickly kill the owner of the inn, pretending that he was provoked, but he did not expect so much trouble. Lu Renee looked at the roof of the hotel where his student was sitting and wondered what she said, that it was all a trap. He was surprised that all this could have been a setup. Yu Mayan stood next to Lu Renee and said that it was much busier than she thought. She looked at the girls and asked what the guard of the Iron Gate sect and the Saint of Wangu Palace was doing here. Then she looked back at Y and his disciples, saying that a rich commoner, an ordinary commoner, and a suspicious boy were standing here. She was surprised to recognize them as the winners of this year's Path of the Sword tournament. She heard that there was a real massacre in the arena number this time, and one of the disciples of the Wangu Palace still had not woken up. She was surprised that these three were able to take away a place from an entire crowd of War King stage masters. Residents who watched what was happening were surprised by what they heard. They knew that the winners lived in their city, but they could not imagine that these three were them. One of the residents added that he always knew a Y, who was recently an ordinary worker at the hotel. They continued to discuss it, asking how he managed to become a hotel owner. Someone added that they have seen this guy practice martial arts often, but he looks more like an ordinary beginner. Another man said that he remembered that a Y was often bullied because of his weak nature, so if he really won the tournament, he would not let anyone bully him. Yu Mayan grinned and said that the locals were also wondering how an ordinary martial arts beginner became so strong so quickly. She didn't believe that a person could change so quickly. Y got angry and told the girl to stop using hints and directly say what she needed. He thought he was tired of trying to figure out what she needed. Xiu approached her master and said that she knew this girl, and that she was the master of the Moon Reflection Tower, who was in charge of reconnaissance and information gathering. The guy was surprised that Xiu knew everyone. And the girl continued by saying that this girl is very good at lying and that she likes to create problems by pretending to be a member of a demonic sect, and then she solves these problems herself. It was because of this that people began to hate the demonic sect. Y thought that apparently it was this woman who turned everyone against the demonic sect, so they were simply slandered. Xiu got angry and said that there was no truth in her words, and her master was an incredible practitioner who would not deal with such minor problems. She added that some unknown people have no right to pretend to be followers of a demonic sect. The guy was surprised that his sect was even more sinister and that propaganda helped them. Y ordered Xiu to calm down and asked if she remembered what he told her, and the girl frowned and said that the master need not worry, since she remembered that she should not say anything about the demonic sect. Xiu said that she doesn't understand what this girl is getting at. She said that her sect had already verified this guy's identity. She said that 2 years ago he arrived in the city and got a job at this hotel, and his parents died a long time ago, so all he had left of his relatives was his sister, whom no one had seen for a long time. Xiu added that he is very kind and has never had conflicts with anyone, and the hotel was given to him by Jian Wujin. Also, his victory in the tournament is justified because he trains a lot and simply hides his strength. Awai was scared by how much information Xiaoyu had obtained about him. He thought that if this was all true, then he was very cool now, and he smiled. He then grinned and thought that the previous owner of the body had chosen the perfect person, because such a poor person would never be suspected of anything. He was surprised that this legend even had the opportunity to explain the existence of Zhu by calling her a cousin. He was surprised how smart the body's previous owner was. However, he did not understand why all the villains want the whole world to know that they are villains, because it is easier to do evil while pretending to be good. He was happy, thinking that it was not for nothing that Li Tsuwai was considered the strongest martial artist. However, he got it all wrong. Yumayan said that she would like to believe the guard of the Iron Gates, but there are still followers of the demonic sect hiding in the vicinity of this city, so she is afraid that someone from this sect might simply take on the guise of a civilian. The girl in the white dress chimed in, saying she didn't think the guy was a runaway follower. Xiao Shuai looked at her in surprise, recognizing her as his sister. Awai was surprised that a hidden character appeared. The girl said that she met this guy 2 years ago and his aura still has not changed, since she feels the auras of people. Awai was surprised that in this world someone could distinguish people's auras, and then he noticed that behind the girl stood Gongzi King, surrounded by a black and purple glow. The guy was scared, not understanding what it was. Zhu looked at the girl in the white dress, recognizing her as a heavenly maiden. Awai tried to understand which heavenly maiden he was talking about. He remembered a girl in a cute pink suit with cat ears who offered to bring some honey, and Zhu told him that this was the same girl he ordered to look for, even if they had to be separated. She didn't understand how he could forget something so important. Awai got scared and said that he forgot everything because of the poison in his body. The guy was nervous and thought that the owner of this body should have kept a diary with important information. Zhu looked at her master intimidatingly, and then grabbed him by the shoulder and said that she should check something. The guy was scared, not understanding what she wanted to do, and thought that she was going to hit him in the chest. Suddenly Zhu took off his top and exposed his torso, which embarrassed Awai. Zhu looked at him and did not see the red mole on his body. She looked at him with loving eyes, thinking that her master was so careful in his disguise that he hid even such details. She decided to take a moment and just admire the master's body. Then she became angry that because of the poison of the palace, Wangu lost not only his strength, but also his memories. She now understood why his behavior changed so dramatically, because it seemed that he had completely lost his memories. But the girl did not understand why then he decided to save her anyway. She was embarrassed, deciding that their souls were so tightly connected. The girl in the white dress thought that, according to Lu Renzia, he was beaten by a child, and next to him was a rich and ordinary guy. She was scared when she realized that the one who beat the clan head's disciple was her sister. At that moment, someone grabbed her shoulder. She turned around and saw Gongzi King, noticing that he was furious because she was trying to justify a why. Gongzi King addressed her, and the girl began to shake in fear. He asked if she was saying that this guy was innocent of anything, and said that he didn't care what sect he was from. But he couldn't believe that she stood up for another man. Gongzi King angrily pulled her hair and said that he had spoiled the girl too much. He looked at her angrily and added that in these 2 years he had not had time to try it, and the girl began to apologize in a shaking voice. His face twisted into a creepy grin and he said it was time to teach her a lesson. He stroked her frightened and tear-stained face, enjoying her appearance. Gongzi King looked at her contentedly and held her by the hair, and the girl cried and asked her to stop. Awai saw the couple surrounded by a red glow and recognized it as one of the demonic techniques. He thought that this girl could be very useful since the previous owner of the body ordered to find her. Besides, her title as a celestial maiden sounds powerful. Awai pointed his finger at the heavenly maiden and ordered Zhu to grab her, and Zhu bowed obediently. At the same moment, Zhu snatched the girl from Gongzi King's arms, which shocked him. Yumayan activated her technique and released the black magic claws from her hands, shouting that the attack had begun. Zhu held the celestial maiden and then jumped away from Yumayan's attack that rushed towards them. Then Zhu threw the girl to the ground, telling her not to get in the way. Zhu took off and began to fight Yumayan while Awai watched. Xiao Shuai ran to the heavenly maiden, worried about her, and the girl said that she was fine. She grabbed the hem of Awai's clothes, asking if Zhu was his comrade. She said that she would need help because she could not cope with 3 opponents. Xiaoyu watched the fight, amazed at the girl's strength. She watched Zhu strike in the sky and thought that her father was right in telling her that she was not ripe for the outside world. The battle continued with Zhu defending herself from Lu Reni's attacks and then from Yumayan's attacks, while Gongzi King sat on the ground, looking at his severed hand. Xiaoyu was surprised how this girl could withstand a fight with 3 strong opponents, and was also able to wound one of them. She realized why her father asked her not to involve her in serious conflicts. Xiaoyu became upset, realizing that she would only be in the way if she interfered. Lu Renyi hit Zhu, and Yu Mian was happy that they were finally able to hit her. Then Yu Mian hit the girl in the face and her mask fell off. Zhu jumped back and landed on the ground, then glared at her attackers. Xiaoyu was frightened when she recognized the girl as the runaway follower of the demonic sect, which surprised Meng Jiankyu, who stood behind her. Xiaoyu looked at Awai, wondering who he really was. Awai seemed very calm, but in fact he was in complete panic, realizing that his true identity had been revealed. Xiaoyu asked Awai if he was in league with Zhu, causing Lu Renyi to grin and ask if the Iron Gate sect guard was now convinced that he was right. He said that from the very beginning they were only pretending to be ordinary people, but in fact they turned out to be followers of a demonic sect. He pointed at Awai and Zhu, asking Xiaoyu why she didn't grab the 2 herself. Lu Renyi became angry and asked if the Iron Gate sect was colluding with the demonic sect. Xiaoyu became angry, saying that she was tired of her sect's slander since they were one of those who directly fought the demonic sect. She was upset, thinking that she herself would like to catch the criminal, but she did not have enough strength, and her father left at the wrong time to visit the heads of the 3 main sects today. Awai smiled, trying to calm down, and asked who they called the follower of the demonic sect. He decided that he would deny that he was a villain until the very end. He said that everyone here themselves knows that a follower of the demonic sect can be identified at a glance, and asked Xiaoyu if she could see his demonic aura. Xiaoyu didn't understand what kind of demonic aura she was talking about. Zhu whispered to the master that she did not understand what he was talking about, but reminded him that his techniques did not obey the laws of this world, so no one would be able to see his true aura. She turned to Gongzi King and said that this man smelled of something demonic, but she did not see him among the sect followers. Zhu said that he could have stolen the master's technique, but was unable to use it correctly. Gongzi King looked at his hand in fear while one of the Lingjian sect disciples tried to treat his wound. Gongzi King was angry, not understanding how this girl could cut off his hand. Zhu looked at Awai in surprise and tried to call him. Awai was upset and said that only he and the readers could see the red-black glow of the aura, although he thought that everyone could see it. He did not understand why there were Buddha techniques in this world, but not demonic ones. Awai was upset that to others, fighting against the strong martial artists of the demonic sect looked boring. He was surprised that not only was he reborn as a strong martial artist, but he could also see demonic auras. The guy grabbed his head, not understanding why everything was not going according to his plan, because he wanted to ward off suspicion by pointing to a man with a creepy aura, but instead revealed that he was from a demonic sect. He didn't understand what to do, because Zhu couldn't protect them alone, and he wasn't able to fight because of the poison. Suddenly he realized something and remembered that the celestial maiden said that she could see aura, and looked at her. The heavenly maiden looked at him in surprise, because she also did not see anything. Awai looked at her in shock and remained silent, and then covered his face with his hand and began to cry, saying goodbye to his quiet life. He decided that 20% of his power blocked by the poison would be enough to escape. He thought that he would take Xiao Shuai and his sister with him and try to start over. Jian Wujin looked at the master, not understanding what was happening, and thinking that they had completely forgotten about him. Awai raised his hands and said that he would no longer pretend, but he was interrupted by someone who shouted that he was really from the demonic sect. Awai got angry and turned around, asking why she was yelling, because he wanted to introduce himself. Meng Jiankyu looked somewhere in fear and pointed her finger, telling Awai to turn around. Behind him sat Gongzi King on his knee, blazing with a demonic aura. Gongzi King insulted everyone, and instead of his severed hand, a new red hand began to grow. He was angry that someone dared to deprive him of his hand, and shouted that he would kill everyone here. Awai silently looked at Gongzi King, and then was delighted with this turn of events and changed his mind about confessing. Lu Renyi looked at Gongzi King angrily, realizing that he was distraught. Lu Renyi took off and hit Gongzi King with his technique. The blow landed directly on the back of the distraught Gongzi King. People in the square began to run away, shouting that there was indeed a follower of a demonic sect. Zhu asked the master what they should do now. She recalled that the Lingjian sect is considered righteous, so for the sake of reputation, their leader will even commit murder just to prove his innocence. Awai smirked, saying that the leader of this sect understands what is happening here, so if they allow Gongzi King to be killed, they will miss the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. He turned to Zhu and said that from now on they are righteous people who themselves volunteered to destroy the remaining followers of the demonic sect. Zia and the third elder of the Yuden sect were flying over the forest. Zia said that he didn't think that the elder had already met a Y at the sword tournament. The old man laughed and said that he himself did not expect this and was still trying to figure out how to find this guy after the tournament. He asked if a Y really opened his hotel, because then it turns out that he wants to continue his journey alone. He added that now it is not surprising why he refused to join the sect. Zia stroked his beard and said that a Y simply did not want anyone to limit his freedom, and that he respected that the guy chose his path and opened a wonderful hotel. The elder smiled and said that his own path is good, but sooner or later he will find enemies, because a little time has passed since the tournament, and the Lingjian sect has already turned against him, so it is very important to have allies. The third elder still hadn't given up on the idea of luring this guy into his sect. Zia said that the guy would rather choose to fight his enemies than join someone's sect. He added that with great strength, allies are not really needed. Zia was afraid that a Y would actually join the sect. The old man said that all this does not matter because he has already come here. He asked if that was the hotel in the distance and added that it seemed fun there. Zia confirmed this and said that the Lingjian sect had brought quite a lot of followers. He looked at the hotel and was shocked to see a destroyed roof, fire, and explosions. As they flew closer, they saw Zhu, who was fighting with Yu Mayan, whose identity they did not know, and Lu Rini, who was attacking the crazy Gongzi King, who reminded Zia of a demonic sect follower. Then he saw a monk who was beating people with his technique. Zia was scared, not understanding what was happening here. Zia Yu was sword fighting with some man and screaming, not understanding why the Lingjian sect was attacking civilians. She looked into the devastated face of the attacker, who said that everyone needed to be tied up by order of the head. And at that moment Gongzi King swung his sword and almost wounded the girl. Some kind of explosion threw all the people away, and Zia defended his daughter using technology. Bang Jianqiu told Zia Yu that there was something wrong with these people, and a Y said that it was like someone was controlling them. He explained that although they are conscious, their body does not obey them, and they move like walking corpses. He explained that these are all signs of the absence of a soul. He looked at the beaten man with empty eyes, and Meng Jianqiu didn't understand what he was talking about. He explained that Li Tzu-Wai, being a martial artist, had tried many cultivation methods, and such devastated people were waste from the cultivation of his techniques. So as soon as they grasped the practice, everything would return to normal. Meng Jianqiu asked him in surprise how he knew about this, and the guy said that it was a secret and thought that he actually just owned the original of this technique. The third elder of the Yuden sect landed in front of Zia and his daughter, saying that the young ones are lucky to be so energetic. He noticed Zhu and said that Cousin Awai's skill was excellent as always. Zia was shocked to learn that she was Awai's sister. They looked at Zhu, who was fighting with someone, and the old man asked if he knew the white-haired girl. Zia thought for a moment, and then got scared, because he realized that she was one of Li Tzu-Wai's closest followers. The old man drank from his pot and then broke it and smiled. His arms began to grow with muscles and his whole body increased several times with the muscles that had appeared. And he said that now he too would have fun. He jumped towards Lu Rini and Gongzi King, who were attacking each other with techniques. Awai noticed this, happy that the old man from the Yuden sect was also here. He decided that he needed to dispel all suspicions in his direction and clear his name. He looked around and then called out to Zio Shuai, who was standing behind him. The old man meanwhile beat Gongzi King, asking if he liked him, and then punched Lu Rini directly in the face. Lu Rini bowed his head and blood came out of his mouth. He grabbed his head, surprised that he dared to hit him, because even his grandmother did not hit him in the face. He decided to kill every single one, because he had already ruined his reputation. He wanted to use the technique, but realized that he could not release the Jai energy. He clutched his chest in horror, realizing that not only could he not release it, but it was as if it was not left at all, as if someone was sucking it out. He knelt down and looked down, and meanwhile Zio Shuai performed the Great Yin Star Absorption method, and held all the Jai energy in his hands. Zio Shuai stared at the enemy and frowned. The heavenly maiden smiled as she held a basket of flowers in her hands and told her parents that she was home. Her name is Da Pioleng and her name perfectly reflects her beauty. She was so beautiful that she could be considered the main character of some book, but the main characters always get into trouble. People felt sorry for someone, asking what would happen to the daughters of these people now. Someone replied that old man Zhao would definitely take care of them, because their parents had worked for him for so long. Old man Zhao brought Da Pioleng to Gongzi King and asked if his daughter was not beautiful. He assured Gongzi King that he would definitely like her. Gongzi King looked at the girl and said that she was really graceful and beautiful. Da Pioling didn't understand what was happening or where her parents were, and she was scared. Da Pioling stood near Gongzi King and some girl was on her knees serving him tea. He took the cup from the tray and after tasting it, he said that the tea tasted bad. The girl was scared and, stuttering, said that she had never prepared such teas before. She begged to be forgiven. He stood up and looked at her, saying that he would not scold her for this. Then he took her head and approached her, saying that he wanted to take a closer look at her. Gongzi King sucked the soul out of the girl and her body dried up. Da Pioling was carrying clothes and froze when she saw something. Gongzi King asked why she stopped, and then ordered him to dress him quickly. He stood with his arms spread apart in one robe, and the girl looked at him in fear. She approached him and began to dress him, asking about that maid. He said that girl was just a useless toy who should not be attached to. He added that since she was so worried about her, she could look at her herself, and that Da Pioling was not only beautiful, but also very kind. Da Pioling walked towards the curtain and then froze in horror. The man hovered over her, asking why she was silent, while Da Pioling looked down in fear. She saw that maid who asked for help and looked like a dead man with a dried out body. The maid's beaten hand fell onto the bed and hung over the edge. Da Pioling covered her mouth with her hands and began to cry. She turned around and addressed Gongzi King. Gongzi King just smiled evilly and said that she was special and he wouldn't do that to her and that she should call him master. He hugged her, which made the girl even more scared. Gongzi King smiled, thinking that it would be a waste to use such a beauty just once, so he would try it out when he broke through to the next stage. He was confident that the demonic technique would become even more effective with her energy. He continued to grin and thought that then he could make his sect the strongest in the world. Meanwhile, at the main entrance of the hotel, Gongzi King, Yu Mayan and Lu Reni sat tied up on the ground while everyone else looked at them. Gongzi King was angry, saying that no one had the right to go against him and that he would kill everyone. Awai scratched his ear, not taking his words seriously, and asked Zhu to silence the man. The girl obeyed, and then drops of blood flew in front of Awai's face. He was shocked and told Zhu that he did not ask to kill him. The girl was holding a dagger in her hands and her face was covered in blood. She said that he had previously asked to kill someone, but apparently she misunderstood him. Lu Reni said that he didn't know anything about this, because if he knew that he was a follower of the demonic sect, he would have dealt with him himself. Yu Mayan got angry, asking if he really thought they would believe him, and said that she was the only one who didn't know anything about it. Lu Reni contradicted her and said that he didn't know how things would turn out and that she should think of something since she was so smart. The girl became even more angry and screamed that she had run out of spiritual power, and that she didn't know that the two were related to the demonic sect. Awai told Zia that it was impossible to get rid of the demonic Shai, so he would have to be killed one way or another. He thought that this was the first time he had witnessed a murder, but he must not show his excitement. Zia Yu wanted to ask Awai something, but her father interrupted the girl and said that he understood everything and there was no need to worry about it. He sent Awai to rest and said that he would sort everything out himself. Awai wondered that they had now witnessed Zhu kill one of their sect followers, so they should avert suspicion. He wanted to say something about Zhu, but heard that he was allowed to rest. He was surprised that they did not question him, not believing that the members of the Iron Gate sect were so generous. Zhu grabbed her father's shoulder and asked him why he stopped her. She said that Awai knew too much about the demonic sect, so they should question him. Her father told her that she should be more patient, because Awai was unlikely to be associated with the demonic sect. The girl said that this guy was close to Zhu, who was the main assistant to the head of the demonic sect. The man said that she was making hasty conclusions because she was not looking at the situation from different angles. He asked her if Awai would go with Zhu if he were a follower of the demonic sect. He added that it was very strange that one of the strongest followers of the demonic sect began to obey this guy and that Awai was very strong, so he could simply take control of her with his technique. Zia said that this guy knows so much about the sect because he interrogated Zhu, so there is no need to create problems for him, because he himself will tell everything when the time comes. Zia Yu was surprised and said that this actually makes sense. She asked if her father had heard anything about the demonic aura that Awai mentioned. The man frowned and looked at her, asking what it was and how it had anything to do with the demonic sect. The third elder of the Yuden sect interrupted their conversation and said that for now they could forget about demonic auras and sects, because he was interested in something more important. He said that Awai was a pretty simple guy, and asked Zia if Awai had given him a perfectly compatible technique, and then asked him to share it with him. Zia looked at him with disgust and said that since he thought Awai was so simple, he could negotiate with him himself, and that he valued this gift very much, and would not share it. The old man got upset and said that Zia was too stingy and that he would ask for the equipment himself. He added that this guy's techniques should be much more powerful than the girl's soul-devouring technique from the sword tournament, so he should have one that would suit the old man. Meng Jianqiu was surprised and then asked if the old man actually mentioned the soul-devouring technique just now.